Chapter 83. Old Ma spat and looked at Lu Chen with disdain. He said, "Do you think you can rebel just because you say so? It's easy for you to say that." Lu Chen laughed and poured wine into their glasses again. He said, "Then what do you think we should do?" Old Ma said sternly, "If I were a disciple of Taiji's lineage, I wouldn't be able to defeat the Kuan-ji who have the advantage in numbers. Then I might as well admit defeat and behave myself. Besides, the two of us are saying alarmist words here. In fact, in the Kunlun party, the two groups of disciples may not really be like fire and water. No matter what, they are still Kunlun disciples of the same sect and ancestor. They just have some disputes on ordinary days. How big of a deal can it be?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said, What you said makes sense. Perhaps in another 200 or 300 years, the tables will turn. At that time, the iron branch's strength will suddenly soar, suppressing the Kuan-ji branch." Old Ma laughed and said, "Isn't that so? Who knows what will happen in the future? Let's drink, let's drink." The two of them clinked their glasses and made a crisp sound. The black dog lying under the table looked up and then lowered its head to gnaw on the bone. Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen and said with a smile, "Speaking of which, in a few days, I may go up the mountain to become a Kunlun disciple. At that time, everything will naturally be arranged by that person. I think he will not treat you too badly. Oh yes, as a disciple, it doesn't matter which branch you belong to. The most important thing is to be well-informed and convenient." Lu Chen interrupted Old Ma's speech and said, "You go tell the damn baldy that I want to be in Kuan-ji. If he dares to put me in Tieji, I will kill his oxen." Cough, cough, cough. Old Ma suddenly choked and coughed on the spot. There are a lot of influential clans in Kunwu City, and most of them are the descendants of experts who have achieved the Dao in the Kunlun party for several thousand years. They have been passed down from generation to generation, and they are inextricably linked to the Kunlun party. Old Ma pointed to the north and said, "These big families and clans have two biggest advantages. First, they follow the Kunlun party wholeheartedly and become its claws, teeth, and eyes. I don't dare to say far away, but within a radius of 2,000 miles from Kunwu City, nothing can escape the Kunlun party's grasp. Second, over the years, almost all the outstanding talents in these big families and clans have entered the Kunlun party's tutelage, and many outstanding talents have emerged from them." Lu Chen nodded. Suddenly he frowned and said, "According to you, we can't hide from the Kunlun party's spies even if we come here?" Old Ma snorted and proudly said, "That's only for ordinary people. What kind of person am I, Old Ma Xiaoyun? No one can recognize me no matter what I do, not to mention that I have that person secretly watching over me. Don't worry, it'll be fine." Lu Chen laughed and said, "In any case, it's those children of influential clans who are powerful, right? We can't afford to offend them." Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, "Bullshit. At the end of the day, you brat, there's someone standing behind you, supporting you. Until now, that person still doesn't have a disciple, but he has an exceedingly powerful peerless divine ability. If you really shed all pretense of cordiality with him, even if all the influential families in Kunwu City joined hands, none of them would dare to oppose you." Lu Chen laughed and said, "Unfortunately, I can't have a falling out with him, so I can only endure, right?" Old Ma sternly said, "That's right." "Then aren't you talking nonsense?" "I'm not talking nonsense." Old Ma solemnly said, "While you're suppressing your resentment, you can think to yourself, when I'm done with my business in the future, I'll come and settle the score with you. Let's see if you idiots who look down on others will kneel in front of me at that time." Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh and said, "You're really thinking too far ahead." Old Ma laughed mischievously and said, "Of course. All these years, I've been so angry at you that my life has been shortened by 10 years. Every time, didn't I secretly think like this to get through it?" Lu Chen extended a finger to him to show his respect, then he casually said, "Nowadays in the Kunlun party, who has a deep background and can't be provoked? Tell me all of them. In the future, I'll stay away from them." Old Ma thought for a moment then said, "Right now, you have the air of a useless person on your face. At most, you're only at the qi refining realm. The Kunlun party is so big, and there are at least 80 to 90,000 people with higher cultivation than you. It seems like you can't provoke any of them." "Lu Chen," Old Ma said again, "Oh, but of course there are some who are especially powerful. You especially can't provoke them. Everyone, people as powerful as spiritual master Yuanying and Jean Dan Friar can crush you with a finger. Their direct disciples are almost all elite disciples, so you should also stay away from them. As for the disciples of the aristocratic families, although there are many Kunwu aristocratic families, there will always be ups and downs. Right now, the most powerful families are probably the Bai, Tai, and Su clans. You should give in to them. As for the small aristocratic families that have declined, they actually don't matter. Lu Chen suddenly thought of something and asked, "Is there an aristocratic family with the surname Yi in this city? How strong is it?" "Yi clan." Old Ma thought for a moment then said, "It's all right. These years, I haven't heard of any powerful figures emerging from this family. It can't be considered one of the most powerful families, but it can't be said to have declined either. It can be considered average." "Why are you asking about it?" Lu Chen said. "Oh, it's nothing. I've seen a girl from this family before." He then told Old Ma about how he met Xin in the Land of Chaos. Old Ma frowned and said, "Why didn't you tell her about this?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "What would happen if I told her?" Old Ma didn't hesitate at all and said, "Of course, I'd think of a way to avoid this flaw and not let her get in the way." Halfway through his sentence, Old Ma's voice suddenly dropped and his expression changed slightly. He glanced at Lu Chen, shook his head, and sighed softly. He didn't say anything else. Lu Chen smiled and said, "Yes, don't let her get in the way." He lowered his head and looked at the wine cup in his hand. The amber wine trembled slightly in the cup. After a while, he raised the cup and drank the wine. As the days passed, Lu Chen quietly stayed in the small courtyard. It could be said that he didn't go out at all. Fatty Old Ma went out a few times. He came and went in a hurry, and no one knew what he was busy with. Even Black Dog sneaked out to stroll in the alley outside, but he quickly ran back. When he was bored, Lu Chen would sit behind the counter in the front hall when Old Ma went out. He said that he was helping Old Ma look after the shop. However, he soon realized how accurate his previous judgment was. For a whole 7 days, he didn't see a single customer come to the Black Hill Pavilion. On the morning of the 8th day, Old Ma very seriously told Lu Chen that there should be some progress in helping him infiltrate the Kunlun party, and he would go out to do it. So Lu Chen sat quietly behind the lonely counter and looked out the door at the quiet alley. Atsu lay directly in front of the door, enjoying the passing wind from the alley. Its tail wagged from time to time, as if it was enjoying its dog life. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of footsteps coming from the bluestone road in the alley outside. After a moment, a clear and melodious voice, like a wind chime gently swaying in the spring breeze, came from outside. Black Hill Pavilion. What a strange name. Chapter 84. The black dog suddenly pricked up its ears, then suddenly jumped up and stared at the door with its eyes shining. It bared its sharp fangs and let out a low growl from its throat, looking like it was about to bite someone. There was an exclamation from outside the house, but a moment later, a figure suddenly appeared at the door. It was Lu Chen. Lu Chen kicked the stupid dog to the ground and scolded, "Stupid dog! This is a guest. If you want to eat meat and bones in the future, you will have to rely on him. Do you want to die? Woo-woo." The low and fierce growl suddenly changed, and the ferocious aura on the black dog disappeared in the blink of an eye. It wagged its tail wildly and hummed in a low voice. It ran out of the door and circled the figure outside the door twice, shaking its head and wagging its tail without any integrity to speak of. "Ah, yeah." The person outside the house was shocked at first, then let out a sound of, "Ha!" but then burst out laughing. She covered her mouth and laughed. "Why is this dog so fun?" Lu Chen looked up and saw a young girl about 10 years old standing on the bluestone road outside the house. She had almond-shaped eyes and peach cheeks, and her skin was as white as snow. Although she had not grown up yet, from the looks of it, she would definitely be a stunning beauty in the future. At this moment, the little girl looked at the black dog jumping around beside her. She seemed to find it very interesting, and she was full of smiles. There was a soft breeze blowing through the alley, and her red sleeves fluttered in the wind. At this moment, the spring breeze, the deep alley, and the young girl. This scene was like a beautiful painting. Lu Chen called out to the stupid dog that was jumping around blindly. Then, his gaze fell on the girl's face, and he couldn't help but sigh in admiration in his heart. Although the girl in front of him wasn't very old, her complexion was truly the first time he'd seen someone with such a complexion. It could be said that she was born with a beauty that could cause the downfall of nations and people since she was young.
Miss, what's the matter?
Lu Chen asked the little girl politely, and at the same time, glanced into the distance of the alley. There was no one in the alley. She seemed to have come alone. The girl pointed at the signboard with the words, Black Hill Pavilion, and asked, "Is this a shop?" Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then he turned around and said, "I guess so." The girl nodded with a smile and walked in. At the same time, a pair of bright and clear eyes looked at the simple things in the shop. She was a little curious and a little cautious. Lu Chen walked back to the counter and asked, "What do you want to buy?" "Yes," the young lady responded, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she glanced at the row of shelves behind the counter. There were some items on the shelves inside the store. Most of them were the most common spirit materials. They looked like they had been there for a long time because many places were covered in dust. After noticing that the girl's gaze had become a little strange, Lu Chen also turned around to look. When the scene on the shelves fell into his eyes, Lu Chen was also stunned for a moment. Then he turned around and smiled a little awkwardly, saying, "The owner of this shop is very lazy. I've let you see a joke." "Hey, are you not the shopkeeper of this Black Hill Pavilion?" The girl asked with some surprise and looked around. In this shop, it was obvious that only Lu Chen was looking after the shop. "I'm not the shopkeeper here," Lu Chen said seriously. "In fact, I am the uncle of the shopkeeper. Today, he went out to buy goods, so I came to help look after the shop." "Oh, I see." The girl nodded as if she believed him. However, when she looked at the simple appearance of the shop, her face gradually revealed a difficult expression. Lu Chen asked with a smile, "What do you need? Tell me. If there is, I will show it to you. If there isn't, then there's nothing I can do. Anyways, I can't force you to buy or sell in broad daylight, right?" The girl smiled again. At that moment, the beauty of the girl hit him in the face, like the clear sky after a storm. There was a refreshing atmosphere. "I want to buy some Zhongjuzi." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Zhongjuzi, wait, let me see if there is any." Okay." The girl smiled. Lu Chen searched the shelves and finally found this relatively common spirit material in a shelf. He put it on the counter and said, "There really is. If it was anything else, I wouldn't give it to you. But this spirit material, Zhongjuzi, is taken from the seed. There is a hard shell on the outside and it will not spoil after 10 years. You should be able to use it." The girl thought about it and nodded. "Yes, that is true. My master also said so. All right then, I'll buy 10. Okay." Lu Chen picked out 10 Zhongjuzi that looked good. He found a cloth and wiped them clean. Then, he wrapped them in paper and handed them to the girl. The girl smiled sweetly and took the paper bag. As she put it away, she reached into her pocket and said, "How much? Ah." Suddenly, she exclaimed and her expression changed. It was as if she was stunned. Lu Chen looked at her and said, "What is it?" The girl's cheeks flushed red. Her skin looked white and rosy, adding to her beauty. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, "I seem to have forgotten to bring money." "Oh, I see." Lu Chen sighed. This business was too difficult. There was hesitation on the girl's face. After a moment, she said awkwardly to Lu Chen, "Uncle, I have an urgent need for this Zhongjuzi. Can I take it first? I will have someone send the money later." Halfway through her words, she suddenly found that Lu Chen was staring at her with a strange expression. She couldn't help but lower her voice. A moment later she couldn't help but ask, "Can't I?" Lu Chen coughed and didn't answer. He asked instead, "What did you call me just now?" The girl stilled and said, "Uncle. You are so old, you are the uncle of the shopkeeper here." "Oh, okay." Lu Chen shook his head and then said seriously to the girl, "No, you cannot owe money for the goods." The girl was shocked. She seemed to want to say something but her face seemed to become even redder. She said in a low voice, "I am not that kind of person. I said I will return it. I will definitely return it." That grace of lowering her head was enough to intoxicate people without drinking. Her watery eyes were enough to make the world fall for her. Lu Chen shook his head and said, "You can't." The girl looked sadly at him and could only put the paper bag in her hand back on the counter. Then she turned and walked out. Just as she was about to reach the door, Lu Chen's voice suddenly came from behind her. Hey! Your money bag is gone. The girl's footsteps suddenly stopped. Looking back, she saw that Lu Chen had walked out from behind the counter. At the same time, he was holding a small red bag with a flower embroidered with gold thread. Ah! I was wondering where the money bag went. The girl's beautiful eyes widened and she quickly walked over. She said with a giggle and then reached out to Lu Chen. Lu Chen let her grab the small bag but he didn't let go. The girl pulled and was somewhat surprised. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "Uncle, why don't you let go?" Lu Chen said, "I can return the money bag to you, but you should also return the Zongjuzi in your sleeve to me." As he spoke, he didn't look at the girl's suddenly stiff smile. He sighed and said, "Also don't call me uncle. It sounds weird." Chapter 85. The girl tugged at the pouch twice, but found that Lu Chen's grip was exceptionally firm, and she couldn't pull it back. After her expression changed, the gentleness and carefulness on her face suddenly disappeared, and was replaced by a kind of annoyance. With a snort, her other hand suddenly raised, and a paper bag actually flew out from her sleeve, smashing towards Lu Chen's face. Lu Chen reached out to catch it, and casually grabbed it with his hand, then nodded and let go. The girl took a step back, and first hid the small bag in her bosom, then looked up and down at Lu Chen, coldly snorted and said, "I can't tell, you actually know such despicable methods." Lu Chen laughed, and said, "I used to rely on this to make a living." As he said that, his gaze fell on the girl's exceptionally beautiful face, and he frowned, saying, "Little girl, since you have such a beautiful appearance, why can't you do anything? Do you really have to do this? Don't blame me for not warning you. These despicable people are not good. With your beautiful face, if you aren't careful, I'm afraid you'll be eaten alive." Oh! The girl didn't look old, only about 10 years old, but at this moment, after removing her disguise, her body suddenly had an additional mature aura. Her young face revealed a disdainful look, and she looked at Lu Chen saying, "So, you are still a good person?" Lu Chen said, "I can't say that I'm a good person, but it's not bad to remind you, what do you think?" "Che!" The girl sneered, and said, "You're just saying it casually. Less nonsense. Do you have anything else? If not, I'm leaving." This swindler was actually so self-righteous, as if not stealing from Lu Chen, but Lu Chen's fault. Lu Chen also couldn't help but laugh, but first, this girl was really too young, and second, her face was already very beautiful at such a young age, it really made people unable to harden their hearts to do anything. He immediately waved his hand and said, "You can leave anyway, next time you're caught, I won't be so polite. This broken shop, I'm not just passing by, even if you pay me money, I won't come again." The girl angrily shouted, then turned around and walked out of the door. The black dog next to her wagged its tail and came over, jumping enthusiastically beside the girl. The girl looked at the black dog, and especially saw the lame Atsu's hind legs. She was first startled, but then her eyes became slightly soft, and she reached out her hand to touch the head of the Atsu, and said, "This dog is much cuter than your master." The Atsu tilted its head, and stuck out its tongue, and looked affectionate. Suddenly Lu Chen from behind and said, "Atsu, that's a bad guy, he wants to steal our things." The Atsu didn't seem to react for a moment, and blankly looked back at Lu Chen. Lu Chen sternly said, "Be fierce to her. Bite her." Atsu jumped up, as if he had suddenly come to his senses. Immediately, the hair on his neck stood up, and he let out a low growl, baring his fangs at the young girl. He looked like a hungry wolf, ready to pounce and bite someone in the next moment. Ah! The girl was shocked, and suddenly jumped away as if she was electrocuted. She quickly ran out of the door and then cursed at the shop, a house full of monsters, bad people and stupid dogs. Woof 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 woof. As the Atsu roared, it suddenly rushed out. The girl screamed and ran away. Her speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, she ran out of the alley. The Atsu chased a step, but was stopped by Lu Chen from behind, and then turned back bitterly. But then it seemed to be happy again, and quite proud. It circled around Lu Chen a few times, and kept barking, as if it wanted to take credit. Lu Chen sighed, looked at it, squatted down, and grabbed the head of the Atsu in front of his eyes, pulled its ears, and scratched the dog's fur. After looking left and right, he frowned and said, "Strange, I remember that snow wolves and black jackals are intelligent and cunning monsters. Why do you always look stupid? Woof 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 woof." The Atsu stuck out half of its tongue and licked Lu Chen, and looked very happy. In the evening, old Ma came back. As soon as he entered the house, he pulled Lu Chen to close the door and went to the backyard. Then he said with a smile, "It's finally done." Lu Chen nodded and said, "That's good. When do we go up the mountain?" Old Ma said, "In 3 days. A few days ago, the Kunlun party just held the annual Immortal Appraisal meeting, and they accepted a new batch of disciples. Recently, it's the time for those who have no chance to officially join the sect to display their supernatural powers. You're not conspicuous at all among them." Lu Chen looked at him and said with a smile, "What do you mean by displaying their supernatural powers?" Old Ma laughed and said in a low voice, "On the surface, the Kunlun party wants to accept so many disciples, but in fact, there are a lot of people who want to squeeze their own children into the sect. Don't tell me you don't know about this." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "From what you said, there are quite a lot of disciples like me who sneak into the sect in a roundabout way." Old Ma said with a smile, "Of course. The Immortal Appraisal meeting has accepted 500 people, and they can at least squeeze another 200 or 300 in." "Damn." Lu Chen was shocked and said, "There are so many." Old Ma snorted and said, "The more they accept, the more spirit stones they can collect. This business is better than anything else." Lu Chen said with emotion, "You're right." At night, 2 people and a dog sat in the small courtyard again. Old Ma took a sip of wine and said to Lu Chen with a frown, "You let that little girl go just like that?" Lu Chen said helplessly, "What else can I do? I can't really detain her, can I?" Old Ma thought for a while and said, "At least you should ask about her identity, background, and name, right?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's useless to ask. It's all fake." Old Ma clicked his tongue, and his eyes suddenly became a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Speaking of which, why didn't I notice that you have this trick before? I didn't see you learn it from that person." Lu Chen smiled, picked up a cup of wine and lightly said, "That was before I met him. I was muddling around in this city, trying to survive. Aside from picking up trash, I also learned how to steal and swindle people." Old Ma was stunned, and looked at Lu Chen for a long time without saying anything. After a long time he said in a low voice, "It's not easy to be a lowly person. You were so young back then. Did you suffer a lot?" "Yes." Listening to Lu Chen's extremely simple answer, Old Ma didn't know what to say for a moment. After a while, he laughed dryly and changed the topic, and said, "Haha, that little girl is really unlucky. She happened to pass by here and wanted to do some business, but she actually met an expert. She must have been half dead with anger." "No." Lu Chen suddenly interrupted Old Ma. Old Ma was startled and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen smiled, and then he gazed at the cold and dark night sky in the distance. After that he took a sip of wine and said, "All those years ago when I did all these things that harmed people, I'd always checked and calculated carefully, and there was no such thing as a coincidence. As for whether she happened to pass by, I don't know." Chapter 86. What should we do? Old Ma furrowed his brows in distress and said, "It feels a little troublesome." Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Maybe they aren't here for me." Old Ma was stunned and said, "Then who are they here for?" "You." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma's fat face and said seriously, "To be able to open a shop in such a desolate alley, he must be a fat sheep that is easily deceived. I think that's what that little girl is thinking." "Get lost." Old Ma scolded angrily and then took out a book as thick as a finger and threw it at him. Lu Chen caught it and flipped it open to take a look. At the same time he asked, "What is this?" Some of the most famous people in the Kunlun sect, the young geniuses of the younger generation, the children of the aristocratic families with deep backgrounds, and some people with eccentric temperament and behavior. Brief information about them, including Dao techniques, magical treasures, and so on, are all written on it. In addition, there are also some situations in the Kunlun party's main halls. You can take a look when you have time. After you have written it down, burn this book." Lu Chen was silent for a long time. The joking expression on his face disappeared and he sat up straight. Then, with a serious expression, he said to Old Ma, "Thank you for your hard work." Old Ma grinned and said, "This kind of thing should be shown to people who understand. Only then will it be satisfying." Lu Chen sighed and said to him, "With this kind of ability, you can actually do a lot of big things. It's a bit of a disadvantage to hang around with people like me. Old Ma said, in this world, is there anything bigger than what you want to do? Lu Chen sneered and put away the book. Then, he picked up the wine pot and poured wine for Old Ma and himself. At the same time he asked, about the person we are looking for, what do you know? Old Ma shook his head and said, I have no clue. We do not know anything about that person, whether he is a man or a woman, whether he is old or young, whether his cultivation level is high or low. Other than knowing that he is hiding in the Kunlun party to do something big, we do not know anything else. Lu Chen raised his cup and clinked it with Old Ma's, then drained it in one gulp and said, take your time to find it. 3 days later, Lu Chen went to the Kunlun mountain and joined the Kunlun party, becoming a Kunlun disciple that was envied by most mortals. This was a layer of dazzling halo, like a gilded and dazzling coat, draped over his body. To outsiders, it looked so glorious, except for the insiders who were also on Kunlun mountain. Just as Old Ma had said before, although the Kunlun sect, which had a history of 5,000 years, usually paid the most attention to rules and integrity, after so many years, the persistence passed down by the founding master was still flexible. Apart from the 500 new disciples who were officially accepted during the Grand Immortal Appraisal meeting, Kunlun sect had secretly added another 250 people into the sect. Lu Chen was one of them. Unfortunately, his innate aptitude was considered to be the worst among all of them. In the cultivation world, talent and talent were based on the 5 elements wheel in the dantian of the Sea of Qi. The more divine pillars, the higher the talent. Generally speaking, only disciples who had at least 2 5 elements divine pillars would be accepted by famous sects like the Kunlun party. The hope of a first pillar disciple was too small, and the loss outweighed the gain by placing spiritual materials and resources on such a person. Yes, Lu Chen was the kind of person that the loss outweighed the gain, but this kind of person was not rare in the Kunlun mountain, because who did not have the dream of becoming an immortal? No matter how bad one's talent was, there was always a little hope. Besides, even if there was no hope of becoming an immortal, if one could get some opportunities in the Kunlun mountain and practice some magic, not only would one's strength increase greatly, one's life would also be extended a lot. Why not? This kind of thinking was naturally human nature. As for the high and mighty elders of the Kunlun sect, it was impossible for them to care about these small matters. Who didn't have a close relationship with someone? Furthermore, it wasn't like they were sent in for free. Therefore, in such a bright and slightly gray background, Lu Chen safely and calmly entered the Kunlun party, without attracting anyone's attention, and became a servant disciple with the lowest position in the Kunlun party. However, since he was of the lowest position, the Kunlun party would not keep idle people. So Lu Chen was quickly arranged to go to the Bai Chao Tang of the Kunlun party, and like the many other servant disciples, he grew all kinds of spiritual herbs for the Kunlun party. The majestic Kunlun was the first famous mountain in the western land. From a distance, one could only see the majestic peaks rising and falling, and the clouds were like waves. In the deepest part of the huge mountain range, the clouds gathered like a vast ocean, and as far as the eye could see, one could vaguely see the 4 faintly discernible figures of strange peaks floating high above the clouds. It could be said to be a magical place that seized all the creation of heaven and earth. However, this kind of immortal spiritual land, historically, only the most elite part of the Kunlun party could set foot in it. Ordinary servant disciples did not even have the qualification to go near it. In the blink of an eye, Lu Chen had already entered the Kunlun party for a month. Over the past month, he was no different from the people around him. Everyone woke up early and slept late every day, working hard for the spiritual herbs in the Kunlun immortal family's spiritual fields, hoping that one day they could get a lucky chance and stand out from the crowd. There were many servant disciples in the Kunlun party. It was said that among the 100,000 disciples, perhaps 60 to 70,000 were such people. To some extent, it was the hard work of the countless common people at the foot of the mountain, and the many servant disciples on the mountain that supported a small part of the elites of the Kunlun party. As for the Bai Chao Tang, after Lu Chen came here, he was given a spiritual field of 1 mu, so that he could plant spiritual herbs. Every time it was harvest time, he had to hand in a fixed amount of harvest, and then he would be considered to have completed his task. If he did not hand in enough, he would be punished, and if he had an extra harvest, he would be rewarded. Most of the servant disciples relied on these extra harvests that they had worked hard to obtain in exchange for a little hope of standing out in the future. Hope was the most beautiful thing, was it not? For most people it was, but for Lu Chen it was not. He quietly lived in the Kunlun party, and then quietly observed the giant Kunlun party in the shadows of the crowd. After slowly familiarizing himself with the situation here, he also began to touch the things he wanted little by little. Of course, that mysterious devil cult spy was still nowhere to be found. But in this month, Lu Chen had already learned some things. For example, the two supremes of the Kunlun party, Hakushin Jinkuan was in closed-door training on the mountain peak among the clouds all year round, while Supremes Tianlan went to the immortal city of Xianxia and seemed to be very busy. This year, the Kunlun party had accepted more than 700 new disciples. Fortunately, there were many talented newcomers, but those were phoenixes that flew up the branches, and had almost no interaction with sparrows like Lu Chen. And Hong Chuan, whom he had met before, had indeed left the Kunlun mountain a few days ago. It was said that he had gone to the distant northern region to hone his state of mind and cultivation. When Lu Chen heard the news, he sighed for that friend in his heart. But very soon, he thought that he would be very quiet and would be dormant for a very long time in the Kunlun mountain. But suddenly there were waves. It was one afternoon a month after he went up the mountain. At the edge of the forest where his spiritual field was located, he once again saw a familiar person coming out of the forest. It was Xian. That day, Xian's face seemed a little pale. Although her face was still so beautiful, she seemed to be a little absent-minded and did not notice that among the many servant disciples working in the spiritual field not far away, there was Lu Chen. Lu Chen quietly turned around, thinking that Kunlun Mountain was so big, if he missed it today, he might as well not see it again in the future. Trouble. Then, he suddenly heard a scream coming from behind. The voice was sharp, and for some reason, it suddenly reminded him of the journey in the land of chaos. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed, thinking that it was troublesome. Chapter 87. Lu Chen's initial reaction was to turn around and leave. He was prepared to quietly avoid her. After all, Kunlun Mountain was so big and Xian did not seem to have seen him. If he missed this chance, he might not see her again in the future. But the scream that followed was indeed a little frightening. It was as if Xian had suddenly seen the most terrifying thing in the world. Her scream was heart-wrenching. Lu Chen stopped in his tracks, feeling a little helpless. At that moment, his mind replayed the journey with Xian in the land of chaos from beginning to end. He muttered, "It can't be. I don't remember doing anything to you. Are you so afraid to see me?" But when he turned his head to look in the direction of Xian, he suddenly frowned. He saw that when Xian walked out of the forest, a figure suddenly ran out from behind her and grabbed her hand. When the figure that appeared from behind appeared in everyone's line of sight, it immediately caused a commotion among the crowd of odd job disciples who had slowly gathered to watch the show. Even the usually calm Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. At the same time, he instantly understood why Xian would let out such a tragic scream. It was a man wearing the Kunlun party disciple uniform. But his face was completely destroyed. At least a dozen shocking scars remained on his face. His facial features were terrible. One of his ears was missing, his nose was gone, and there was a big cut on his chin. A terrible scar had slashed across his left eye, leaving a pitted red flesh. It seemed that this eyeball had also been destroyed. This face looked like it had been slashed countless times by a sharp blade, or had been ruthlessly gnawed on by a terrifying beast. It was completely devoid of human form. It was hard to imagine that a person who had suffered such serious injuries could actually survive that disaster. At this moment, it was a bright and sunny day. Under the bright sky, the surrounding people all felt a trace of coldness, and a few timid female disciples even closed their eyes and looked away, not daring to look directly at that person. The terrifying face that resembled a demon from hell suddenly appeared behind Xian. After grabbing her, the face leaned in and let out a deep, furious growl. When she lifted her eyes, the face was already inches away from her. No wonder she let out such a shrill scream. "Let me go! Let me go!" However, to Lu Chen's surprise, Xian did not faint from fright. Instead, she screamed in horror and struggled with all her might, trying to break free from the monstrous man's grasp. At the same time, she cried out repeatedly, "Shut up!" The man with the terrifying face let out a low roar, but that did not calm Xian down. Instead, she struggled even more intensely. This scene was seen by the surrounding people, and there was a sudden uproar. A beautiful girl was being bullied by such a monster. No one could stand it. Suddenly, 7 or 8 people from the side came over and shouted to stop it. Lu Chen also took 2 steps forward. No matter what, he had some friendship with Xian. At the same time, he also had some doubts in his heart. After joining the Kunlun party for a month, he had gradually learned a little about this famous sect. Although it was not as perfect as the legends said, the Kunlun party was still a place that followed rules. In general, it was impossible for there to be any public bullying on the Kunlun mountain. However, the scene in front of him was obviously not right. Just when Lu Chen was hesitating whether he should go forward to help, he suddenly heard Xian's voice crying, "Let go, Senior He! I beg you, don't do this." Lu Chen's body trembled. He immediately focused his attention and looked towards that man.
As expected, when he looked carefully, he could vaguely make out a little of that handsome Kunlun disciple's appearance that he had met in Crescent City that day from that little bit of residual outline.
He gang. Didn't he already die on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos? On that day, the scene of a large group of terrible black jackals swarming on the Black Armor Mountain was still fresh in Lu Chen's memory. Then when he looked at He Gang's face again, those clear and terrifying scars that seemed to have been left behind by sharp claws and terrifying beast teeth, Lu Chen couldn't help but feel a slight chill in his heart. Xian was crying and shouting in panic. The odd-job disciples next to her obviously did not know He Gang, so they surrounded him with righteous indignation. But He Gang also seemed to be very emotional and strange.
Under the crowd's gaze, he did not have the slightest intention of retreating, and even glared at the people around him with terrible anger. Seeing that the scene suddenly became tense and on the verge of breaking out, suddenly, a loud shout came from behind the crowd.
"Stop, what do you want?" This shout was full of momentum, and the tone was loud, instantly suppressing all the other voices. After a moment, a tall man walked quickly to the center. He first glanced at He Gang and Xian, and his face slightly darkened, but he did not lose his temper. Then he turned to look at the crowd around him, frowned and said in a deep voice, "Back off! What are you doing here? Do you want to rebel?" Lu Chen stood in the crowd and glanced at this person. Seeing that he had thick eyebrows and a square face, he was a disciple of the Kunlun party's Bai Chao Tang, who was sent to manage the spiritual field. His name was Zhou Kuei. After all, almost all the odd-job disciples were newcomers who knew nothing about cultivation, and planting spiritual fields still needed some tricks, so Bai Chao Tang would often send some disciples down. About every 100 odd-job disciples would have an official disciple in charge, and at the same time, they would teach the tricks of planting and some of the most basic cultivation methods. Zhou Kuei was such a person. Those who could get such a job were basically in the foundation realm, so in the Kunlun party, he could also be regarded as an elite disciple who had reached a higher level. Usually, the odd-job disciples naturally respected Zhou Kuei very much. Although they only called him senior brother, in reality, his position was like a teacher and a father, and they did not dare to disobey him easily. But today's scene was really infuriating, and a bold person in the crowd shouted loudly, "Senior brother Zhou, it's not that we want to cause trouble, but that person is bullying our junior sister in broad daylight." Zhou Kuei's face was as dark as water. He slowly turned around and glanced at He Gang's hand that was still tightly gripping Xian's wrist. He snorted and said, "Junior brother He, you're not doing this right?" Facing this Bai Chao Tang disciple Zhou Kuei, whose cultivation was in the foundation realm, He Gang's imposing manner was obviously weaker, but he still raised his head and shouted through gritted teeth, "I didn't do anything, I just wanted to chat with junior sister E, what did I do wrong?" Zhou Kuei's gaze fell on Xian's pretty but tear-stained face. A trace of sympathy seemed to flash across his eyes, but he still sighed and said, "Junior sister E, is it like this?" Xian struggled with all her might. Perhaps because Zhou Kuei was right beside her, He Gang finally did not dare to use force anymore, letting her withdraw her arm, but there was already an obvious red mark on her wrist. Then, Xian glanced at Zhou Kuei. A complicated expression flashed across her face, like fear, regret, and also like she was at a loss. In the end, she slowly lowered her head and softly replied, "Yes." The odd-job disciples in the crowd immediately burst into an uproar. Everyone had a look of surprise on their faces, and Lu Chen in the crowd frowned, looking deeply at Xian. Chapter 88. The wide spiritual field that everyone was currently in was actually a flat and wide valley in the Kunlun mountain range. It was surrounded by mountains, and in the middle was a rare expanse of flat land that was rich in spiritual energy and fertile. It was a very important production area for the Kunlun party's Bai Chao Tang.
Due to the fact that the largest mountain next to it was the Rock Mountain, this valley basin was named the Rock Mountain Valley. At this moment, the warm sunlight shone down from the sky, shining on Rock Valley. The mountain wind blew through the valley from the forest, and countless spiritual plants danced in the wind, like a magnificent wave. At the edge of the forest at the foot of Rock Mountain, the atmosphere was cold and strange. Many servant disciples gathered there, looking at the young girl with her head lowered in disbelief. Xian's panicked crying didn't seem like she was just chatting in the forest. She was obviously frightened. But in the end, the victim herself said that she was fine, so what else could they do? Zhou Kuei reacted quickly. He turned around and shouted at the servant disciples. "Okay.
Didn't you see that junior sister E said that she was fine? What are you still doing here? Go back to work." Many janitor disciples looked at each other in dismay.
Most of the new disciples were young and full of vigor.
However, everyone knew that there might be some inside story behind this situation. So, under the whispers and strange gazes, the crowd slowly dispersed. After Zhou Kuei dispersed the crowd, he frowned at Gang and Xian at the edge of the forest. He wanted to turn around and leave with a straight face. Who knew that at this time, Xian suddenly ran a few steps towards him and said, "Senior brother Zhou, I'll go with you." Zhou Kuei's body trembled slightly.
Before he could say anything, Gang, who was behind him, already said loudly, "Junior sister E, I still have something to say to you."
Xian didn't even look at him. She looked at Zhou Kuei with pleading eyes. Zhou Kuei was silent for a moment, then nodded his head and said to Xian, "Okay." Xian immediately looked happy and nodded.
Gang was shocked. "Senior brother Zhou, what are you doing?"
Zhou Kuei's eyes flashed with a trace of impatience.
He turned to look at Gang and frowned. "Junior brother everything should be done in moderation.
Besides, junior sister E has something to do with me. Are you trying to discipline me?" Gang subconsciously flinched under Zhou Kuei's piercing stare. After a moment, he seemed to grit his teeth and glanced fiercely at Xian, then turned around and left without a word. As Xian watched Gang leave, she finally heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders.
Zhou Kuei saw her expression and his eyes softened.
He asked softly, "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Xian nodded silently.
Zhou Kuei said, "Let's go."
He walked forward.
Xian silently followed beside him, but after walking for a while, she suddenly heard Zhou Kuei's voice. "Junior sister E, you still have to think of a solution for this matter yourself."
Xian raised her head to look at Zhou Kuei in a daze, only to see that Zhou Kuei was not looking at her.
Instead, he was looking straight ahead, but he said in a voice that only she could hear, "I have known Senior E for many years, and I know that his talent are extraordinary. Now that he is about to break through to the Golden Elixir realm, at his age, his future can be said to be limitless." He turned around with a sympathetic expression mixed with some helplessness. "It doesn't matter if I help you once in a while. Senior brother he will probably just smile when he hears it. But if I help him again and again, I'm afraid he won't like it. Do you understand?" Xian's face turned pale. After a while she lowered her head and said in a low voice, "I understand." At this moment, she seemed to be in a daze. Her face was as pale as paper. She seemed to be trapped in some kind of fear for the future, so much so that she didn't notice that in a spiritual field not far from them, Lu Chen was standing there thoughtfully looking at her figure. The Kunlun party was a famous sect with many rules. But after so many years, it wasn't that it didn't care about human feelings. Living in the mountains was hard and cultivating was boring. So the sect didn't strictly forbid its disciples from leaving the mountain. Generally speaking, even if it was a part-time disciple, as long as he could guarantee to come back before the curfew, the Kunlun party's mountain gate guards wouldn't stop him. However, it was precisely because of the curfew that anyone who violated it would be severely punished. Therefore, unless they received orders from the sect to go out, most people could only stroll in Kunwu City at the foot of the mountain. However, the Kunlun mountain range was very vast. Generally, the disciples who were assigned to cultivate or work on the mountains far away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills would need several hours to reach the mountain gate if they didn't have the ability to fly fast. In fact, they wouldn't be able to go down the mountain. The Shurpan Valley where Lu Chen lived was about 2 hours away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills. It wasn't far, but it wasn't close either. As long as he could squeeze out some time, he could go to Kunwu City for a stroll. In Kunwu City, The fatty old Ma's Black Hill Pavilion was naturally the place he often went to. The remote and quiet alley was as deep and serene as before. It seemed that no matter how many years passed, there wouldn't be a single customer. Old Ma sat on the threshold with a somewhat sad expression. He sighed and said, "Alas, when will there be any business?"
"Don't think about it."
Sitting behind the counter in the room, Lu Chen yawned lazily and said, "Just give up.
"You're not cut out to do business."
Old Ma spat and said indignantly, "Bullshit. Your father was born to be a genius. In the future, I'll definitely do something big and earn a fortune that can rival a country. At that time, you can just wait to kneel in front of me."
Lu Chen said, "Wake up. It's not dark yet. Stop dreaming."
Old Ma muttered. He probably felt that it was really inappropriate to talk about ideals with this person, so he said, "You've been on the mountain for a month now.
How's the situation?"
Lu Chen shrugged and said, "In the beginning, I couldn't say anything. However, this Kunlun party really has a lot of rules. It's a 5,000-year famous sect."
"It's not strange,"
Old Ma said with a smile. Then he glanced at the empty alley outside and said, "By the way, I found the person you asked me to investigate last time."
Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked over.
He said,
"You actually found him. I've underestimated you."
Old Horse had a smug look on his face as he said, "Nonsense.
Who do you think I am?"
As long as I want to investigate, there's nothing on this Kunlun mountain that I can't figure out."
Lu Chen was too lazy to care about this guy's bragging.
He just asked, "Who is that person?"
Old Ma said, "Moonlight cut is extremely difficult to practice.
There are not many young disciples who can practice it. Moreover, it's a woman. Moreover, during that period of time, she was not on the mountain of Kunlun. After searching for a long time, there's probably only one person left. Su Qingjun, the only disciple of the Kunlun party's Masato Kahara."
Chapter 89.
Mu Yuan.
Lu Chen frowned slightly.
After pondering for a moment, he asked with a strange look in his eyes, "The one from the Tieji branch?"
Old Ma nodded and said, "That's right.
That old man is one of the 4 Yuanying Zhenren of the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party. He's also recognized as the strongest in Taoism and divine powers. It's not an exaggeration to say that he's the leader of the Tieji branch." Lu Chen nodded and said, "What about Su Qingjun herself?" Old Ma said, "She's very outstanding. She's extremely talented. It's said that she's one of the top 4 pillars. She can be said to be very gifted. Her progress in Taoism is very fast and she's worthy of the word genius. She's only 22 years old, but she's already at the peak of the foundational state. Among the young foundational state disciples of the Kunlun party, there are about a dozen of them who've reached the peak of the Jindan state and are only one step away. But the most famous ones are Su Qingjun, He Yi, Song Huaisong, and Feng Yu." At this point, Old Ma paused and looked at Lu Chen. "At such a young age, you are only one step away from the Golden Core realm. With this kind of strength and talent, the difference between you and an ordinary Foundation realm disciple is like heaven and earth. I don't need to say more, right?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "If she's lucky enough, she might have a chance to peek into the Yuanying state in the future." "Yes, becoming a Zhenren." Old Ma sighed with some emotion. He then said to Lu Chen seriously, "Since you know it, don't think too much, okay? That girl has no grudge against you. She didn't really hurt you in the land of chaos. You don't have to go against such a proud girl, do you?" Lu Chen's expression didn't change. It seemed that he didn't take this matter to heart. He said casually, "I don't plan to do anything to her. I'm just curious." Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then snorted and said, "That's not necessarily the case. You're full of evil tricks, sinister and cunning. Who knows what you'll do later? Let me tell you, although Kunlun's iron branch is weak, there are still 4 Yuanying Zhenren sitting there. A genius disciple like Su Qingjun would have a limitless future. Tai Ji would definitely protect her like a precious treasure. Don't look for trouble." "Hey!" Lu Chen spat and said, "I came to Kunlun Mountain for the sake of the common people of the world, the righteous path of life, yet I had no choice but to risk my own safety to do such a dangerous thing. Why do you, this servant, always regard me as someone who is worse than the devil cult?" Old Ma said seriously, "You're right, that's the truth." As he said this, He suddenly lowered his head to avoid a stool that flew towards him. Then he looked around and smiled. "Oh yes, where's Atsu?"
"Why don't I see it? I just brought a bag of meat bones for it. It's chewing on it in the backyard," Lu Chen said. "This black dog's appetite seems to be very big. It's eating me poor. Hurry up and bring it up the mountain. Wait for another 2 months. I'm not familiar with it yet," Lu Chen said casually. "Oh yes, there's one more thing. Help me check it out. It's about the girl from the Yi family I told you about last time." As he said this, Lu Chen told old Ma about the scene he saw at the spiritual field in Shurpan Valley. In the end he frowned and said, "He gang didn't die. And looking at Xin, she seems to be afraid of him. I'm afraid there's something strange about it." "Okay, leave it to me," old Ma said with a smile. Lu Chen stood up, looked at the sky, and said, "All right, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going back to the mountain." Old Ma nodded and watched as Lu Chen walked to the door. Just as he was about to step over the threshold, old Ma suddenly said, "There's something you might not know. This year, the Kunlun Party's Immortal Appraisal Conference had a great harvest. The Kunlun Party had recruited many talented 3 pillars and even 4 pillars. However, there's one thing that the Kunlun Party suppressed." Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He turned to look at old Ma. Old Ma looked straight into his eyes. For some reason, there was a complicated and incomprehensible light in his eyes. He said softly, "I heard that during the conference, they found a rare 1-in-a-million peerless genius. That person had all 5 elements, and there were 5 pillars on the Sea of Qi." Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. It seemed that even a calm person like him was startled after hearing about this matter. But very quickly, a trace of a smile appeared on his face. A self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. "Amazing! A 5 pillars genius," he murmured, then raised his head to look at the sky. He said lightly, "Just like me, isn't it?" Old Ma was silent. It was already evening when he returned to the mountain. When Lu Chen walked through the mountain gate and walked along the mountain path to his residence at the foot of Shurpan Mountain, the sky gradually darkened. Night came. At night, Kunlun Mountain was still majestic, but it was less majestic than during the day, and more distant and deep in the night. Each mountain peak was like a silent giant, quietly standing in the darkness, quietly watching Lu Chen walk between the mountains. Unknowingly, there was no one else on the mountain path. Only Lu Chen walked alone. The night was somewhat desolate, and the mountain wind was somewhat cold. It whistled past, and the faint starlight shone on the ground. One could see the swaying shadows, like dancing demons and ghosts. There was still some time before the curfew. Lu Chen looked at the night sky and expressionlessly walked on this dark road. Gradually, even he himself seemed to blend into it, becoming a part of those terrifying shadows. When it was too quiet, one's thoughts would spread out, making one's thoughts seem to be more than usual. As Lu Chen walked, he suddenly thought of the small village that he had lived in for 10 years, and the beautiful girl who was already sleeping by the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain. At this time, would there be a cold wind blowing by the Dragon Lake? Maybe she would also feel a little cold, because she was afraid of the cold before. Lu Chen suddenly shook his head, freeing himself from these thoughts, and then continued walking. The night was still cold, and then he thought of the day before they parted, the strange look in old Ma's eyes when he looked at him. Lu Chen knew what old Ma meant. Although that fatty was not a good person, but for so many years, he was the person that he trusted the most. He knew that old Ma meant well. Old Ma actually felt that it was not worth it for him, and somewhat regretted it. However, some words could not be said to anyone, whether it was him or old Ma, or perhaps everyone actually understood in their hearts. If it was not good enough, how could it be used as a successful bait? If it was not an exceptional talent, how would the evil sect elder, that kind of person, be interested in it? Sacrifice? Perhaps only that big fatty, who was always hidden in the depths of the light, was the truly ruthless and ruthless person. The mountain breeze was faint, blowing past his clothes, as if there was a bone-chilling cold. Lu Chen gently pulled his clothes, thinking that if there was a chance in the future, he should go back to the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain to take a look, add more soil for Ding Dong's grave, and plant more trees beside it. While he was thinking of this, Lu Chen's body suddenly stopped. His footsteps abruptly stopped. In the depths of the winding mountain path, hidden in the dark shadows, in the deep darkness, a soft, trembling whimper suddenly came from an unknown place. In this desolate and cold night, it sounded like the weeping of a night ghost, faintly coming over.
The shadows of the surrounding tall mountains, at this moment, seemed to suddenly cover down, making this section of the mountain path seem especially dark.
The night was deep. It was a desolate time. Chapter 90. The voice was intermittent and trembling, and it seemed especially ghastly and terrifying amidst the dark night and cold mountain wind, causing one to be unable to help but feel a chill run down one's spine. Although Kunlun Mountain was a spiritual mountain paradise, and it was unlikely that there would be any ghosts or spirits coming out to harm people, at this moment, it still sounded a little mournful and frightening. What if there really was a hidden demon or ghost on this mountain? Lu Chen stood where he was, his brows slightly furrowed. He listened attentively for a moment, then said to himself, "It seems to be a female ghost." After saying that, he continued to walk forward, his pace slightly slower than before. At the same time, his eyes kept looking around the mountain path ahead, as if he was looking for something. The mountain path in the night was empty. Dark shadows swayed, as if there were strange gazes hidden in the trees and bushes on both sides of the road, staring at Lu Chen's figure in the darkness. The mountain path was an old road that the Kunlun party had repaired for many years. It was mottled with wind and frost, but it was still firm and smooth, winding and stretching forward silently. The strange sound that seemed like a woman's sobbing was still drifting from ahead, but as Lu Chen walked forward, it gradually became clearer. As he walked, Lu Chen suddenly stopped. He saw a small mountain not far ahead. The mountain path passed through the mountainside, and at the same time, it branched off into a stone path. Lu Chen climbed up the small mountain. The small mountain was full of pine trees, and it was dark in the night. Even the stars in the sky were blocked, and the sweet and mournful sobbing seemed to turn here, as if it came from the mountain. The cold wind blew, and the pine trees rustled. The darkness silently stared at Lu Chen on the mountain path. Lu Chen glanced at the small mountain, then continued to walk up. The sobbing gradually became clearer, and the surrounding darkness became thicker. Not long after, Lu Chen, who was walking on the stone steps, saw a pavilion halfway up the mountain. There was a plaque outside the pavilion, but it was too dark to see the words on it. However, the most frightening thing was that there was a figure sitting at a stone table in the middle of the pavilion. Her back was facing Lu Chen, and her long hair was draped over her shoulders. Her shoulders were shaking slightly, and she was sobbing softly. One above and one below, one in front and one behind. The surroundings were thick with ghost qi. When a gust of mountain wind blew past, it lifted the strand of black hair, revealing the pale skin of the female ghost. It was as if even the air had frozen. "Hey!" Suddenly, a voice came from outside the pavilion with a trace of impatience, instantly breaking the gloomy atmosphere. Then, a figure stepped in and very impolitely complained to the female ghost. "Why are you howling here in the middle of the night? Is there something wrong with your brain?" Ah! The sobbing suddenly went silent. After a moment, the female ghost suddenly seemed to be shocked by herself. She suddenly let out a scream and jumped up from the stone table. She staggered back and looked at the black figure standing at the edge of the pavilion. Her trembling voice stuttered. You don't, come here." "Ghosts. Even ghosts are afraid of ghosts." Lu Chen snorted unhappily and casually lit the firelighter he carried on his body. The moment the fire lit up, it illuminated the faces of the two people in the pavilion. The frightened face of the woman on the opposite side flashed there. After a moment, the expression on her face first stiffened, then revealed a somewhat incredulous expression. She said in shock, "Brother Lu, why is it you?" At this time, the only person in the Kunlun party who would call Lu Chen Brother Lu was naturally only Xianxia. With the dim light of the fire, Lu Chen saw Xianxia's surprised, happy and dazed face. There were still traces of tears and her face was very haggard. He could not help but shake his head. With a wave of his hand, the fire suddenly flashed and extinguished. Darkness once again shrouded the mountain pavilion. Not sleeping in the middle of the night, but coming here to scare people. "You, this young lady, are getting more and more powerful." Lu Chen walked to the stone table in the pavilion and sat down. Xian stood at the side of the pavilion for a moment before carefully walking over. In the pavilion in the night, the faces of the two people became blurred in the darkness again, even if there was only a stone table between them. Perhaps it was surprise, or perhaps it was excitement. Xian did not care about the slightly sarcastic joke in Lu Chen's mouth. Instead, she seemed to be a little embarrassed and shrunk her neck. After a moment she said, "Brother Lu, why are you on this Kunlun mountain?" Lu Chen looked up at the sky and felt that there was almost an hour until midnight.
There was still time, so he said, "Me?
I am now a disciple of the Kunlun party."
Xian widened her eyes and said in shock, "What?
You actually also became a disciple of the Kunlun party?
Hey, don't think that I can't see the look of contempt on your face when it is dark." Xian was shocked and hurriedly waved her hand.
No. Brother Lu, how could I look down on you? I really didn't expect it. But it's really great that you can come to the Kunlun mountain. No matter what, Kunlun is also a famous and upright sect. You must be much better here than at the Crescent City in the Land of Chaos. Lu Chen glanced at her and could feel the sincere joy in this inexperienced girl's words. He felt his heart warm for no reason. Then, he shook his head and snorted. "All right, tell me. Why did you come here in the middle of the night to cry and pretend to be a ghost?" I didn't pretend to be a ghost." Xian only felt her cheeks heat up. Fortunately, in this dim light, perhaps Lu Chen could not see it.
She subconsciously retorted, "You, on the other hand, suddenly jumped out just now."
That was really scary. Don't say that I didn't pretend to be a ghost. Even if I was a ghost, even a ghost would be scared to death by you just now. Hey, I haven't seen you for a while. You've become so good at talking. Lu Chen laughed. Xian did not want to be entangled with him on this topic anymore. She hurriedly changed the topic. "Brother Lu, what is your status now? Where are you arranged to be?" Lu Chen said, "My talent is ordinary. After I entered the sect, I could only be a servant disciple. Now, I'm planting spiritual fields in the rock valley under Baichao Tang." Xian let out a soft cry. She seemed to be in disbelief. What a coincidence. I'm also in Baichao Tang. It's really too. Her voice suddenly paused. Looking at Lu Chen, the smile on her face slowly disappeared.
After a while, with some caution, she whispered to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, today, during the day I stood in the spiritual fields and watched you come out of the forest. Then, I saw you entangle with He Gang until you left."
Lu Chen said lightly. Xian was speechless. After a while, she heard Lu Chen sigh. "All right, now can you tell me what exactly happened?" Chapter 91. The night was dim and the mountain breeze was gentle. Although it was a bit chilly, for some reason, it was no longer as gloomy as before. Instead, there was some warmth. Perhaps people were like this. As long as someone was with them, they would feel better. Loneliness was the deepest fear in the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, after a moment of silence, Xian finally told Lu Chen what had happened during this period of time. After returning to Kunwu City from the Land of Chaos, the Yi family, who were anxious because she had secretly left home, was naturally overjoyed. Although they scolded her a few times, they were glad that nothing serious had happened. However, there were 3 people who had left, but only one person was left when they returned. Moreover, the other 2 were genuine Kunlun disciples. Of course, this matter couldn't be easily brushed aside. Soon, someone from the Kunlun party came down to inquire about this matter. Xian truthfully told them what happened on Black Armor Mountain. At first, everyone sighed with emotion and didn't think too much about it. Even He Gang's elder brother, senior martial brother He Yi, who was well known in the Kunlun party, came over. In the end, he also left in silence and didn't make things difficult for Xian. No one believed that a little girl like Xian, who hadn't even formally entered the Kunlun party, would have the intention or ability to harm those 2 people. The following days were peaceful for a period of time. Soon, it was time for the Kunlun party's immortal appraisal assembly. At this time, a message from Jean Dan Friar, who had taken a liking to Xian, came from Kunlun Mountain. The gist of the message was that Dongfang Tao, a Taoist expert, had suffered more serious injuries than expected. He still had to go into closed-door meditation for a period of time, and it was unknown when he would come out. However, Xian was already of age. If she didn't go up the mountain to learn martial arts, she would probably be delayed. Therefore, according to Dongfang Tao's arrangements, the Yi family sent Xian to Kunlun and she successfully entered a sect. In the end, Dongfang Tao arranged for her to become an official disciple in Bai Chao Tang. Speaking of which, the status of an official disciple was much higher than that of a servant disciple. An official disciple only needed to cultivate and did not need to do any work to obtain cultivation resources. Of course, the prerequisite for such treatment was that one had to be talented enough and have a strong background. In short, up to this point, Xianxia had been living a good life. She was full of hope for the future, happily cultivating on Kunlun Mountain with peace of mind. But a month later, the situation suddenly changed. He Gang, one of the three from that day, actually returned. According to him, he was surrounded by a pack of terrifying black jackals and crazily gnawed on him. Later, he accidentally fell off a cliff and happened to fall into a pool of water below. That was how he managed to escape. Even so, He Gang still suffered greatly. Not only was his handsome face completely ruined, his vitality was also greatly damaged. His cultivation was mostly gone and there were many serious injuries on his body. When he was discovered at the foot of Kunlun Mountain, he was already on the verge of death. No one knew how he managed to make it back. Fortunately, he had a powerful brother, He, who loved him dearly. When he found out about this, he immediately tried his best and used many good medicines and miraculous pills to save him. He even recovered most of his cultivation, which was a great fortune amidst the misfortune. But from then on, He Gang seemed to have suddenly changed into a different person, perhaps because he had received too much stimulation in the land of chaos. His personality was abnormally extreme, and he often quarreled and provoked others. Others, on account of his pitiful experience and He Yi's face, would usually give him some leeway. Then, He Gang discovered Xian, who was also on Kunlun Mountain. It was hard to imagine what He Gang was thinking when he saw Xian. But Xian was very surprised at first. Although she was a little afraid when she saw He Gang's terrifying face, she was still happy that he had survived. But He Gang's reaction was beyond Xian's expectation. When he saw Xian, he was stunned for a long time before he stepped back. But soon he suddenly rushed over with a roar, grabbed Xian's hand, and asked the two of them to become cultivation companions. Then he began to grope her. Xian was scared out of her wits. Needless to say, she resisted with all her might. After she finally escaped, she soon heard that He Gang was spreading rumors in the Kunlun party. He said that when they went south to the land of chaos, the two of them were already in love and had privately pledged to marry each other. It was also because he was deeply in love with Xian that He Gang had risked his life to distract all the dogs when they encountered the terrifying pack of black jackals on the Black Armor Mountain, so that Xian could escape alone and he would be doomed eternally. But now, when Xian saw that his cultivation was damaged, especially his face, she actually turned her back on him. When she heard this, Xian was completely dumbfounded. And things took a turn for the worse, especially when He Gang's elder brother, He, felt sorry for his younger brother's misfortune and publicly said that Xian was ungrateful. For a while, there were many discussions about this matter in the Kunlun sect. Even if Xian tried her best to explain that the situation was not like that at that time, not many people openly expressed sympathy for her. At the same time, He Gang became even more entangled with her. He came to harass her every 2 or 3 days, and insisted that she become cultivation companions with him. The scene that Lu Chen saw at the edge of the forest in Shirpan Valley during the day was the scene that had been repeated in the past few days. Hearing this, Lu Chen finally understood and did not speak for a while. It was quiet inside and outside the mountain pavilion at this moment. Only the light sound of the wind could be heard. Xian quietly looked up at Lu Chen, but found that sitting across the table, he was looking at her with a pair of bright eyes, and the expression in his eyes was a little strange. "Brother Lu, why are you looking at me like that?" For some reason, Xian suddenly felt a little guilty and carefully asked. Lu Chen looked at her, thought for a while and asked, "Before I met you, there was really nothing between you and He Gang, right?" "No, really." Xian suddenly stood up, looking anxious and loudly said, "Brother Lu, I swear to the heavens, there is absolutely no love affair between me and senior martial brother He. At that time, I only thought of him as an older brother, and followed him and martial uncle Han to gain experience." Lu Chen nodded, indicating for her to calm down. Then he muttered to himself for a while and said, "This matter is not a big deal. Not to mention spiritual master Yuanying. Even the sect's Jin Dan friar would be too lazy to care. Oh, speaking of which, don't you also have a backer?" Ask your master Dong Fong Tao to come out and say something. Although that He Yi's prospects are good, but as far as I know, Dong Fong Tao is a veteran Jindan friar, and has achieved Jindan for at least 10 years. With this kind of experience, many people would have to give him face. Xian's face was sullen, and her expression was full of grievance. She said, Master Dong Fong his injuries are not light. That day, after arranging for me to enter the sect, he went into seclusion again. He only said that after he came out, he would perform the ceremony of becoming my disciple. Before that, he first let me follow Bai Chao Tang to practice some basic techniques. I really have no choice.
Lu Chen was startled, shook his head and quietly said to himself, this old man is a good hands-off shopkeeper.
Why do I feel that he is quite similar to that damn Baldy? Chapter 92. Xian didn't hear him clearly.
She asked, Brother Lu, what did you say?
Oh, nothing. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, did you tell your family? Your clan can be considered an aristocratic family in Kunwu City. After so many years, you must have a good relationship with the Kunlun party. Could you ask your elders to find someone to talk to you?
Xian smiled bitterly and said, I did. My family also asked someone to speak on my behalf, but... Her voice became gloomy and she said softly, our clan's current situation is just a... Xian didn't say anything else and Lu Chen didn't continue asking. Some principles had been the same since ancient times. Even if the world changed, it was still very difficult to change. Perhaps the clan had produced outstanding talents a long time ago and passed down the clan's foundation, but the world was very realistic. Now that you were weak, your voice naturally wouldn't be loud enough. Even friendships would slowly fade with the passage of time. A powerful Jindan friar was enough to establish a clan that could be passed down for generations. He was such a genius that everyone thought highly of. They believed that he would definitely become Jindan in the future. Many people even believed that he might have a chance to become the incomparably powerful Master Yuanying. With the existence of such a figure, it was obviously not worth it for those who were not interested in fighting against him for an ordinary family that had nothing to do with them. What's more, from the beginning to the end, He had never stepped forward to make things difficult for Xian. It was just that his brother admired the girl, so he pursued her wholeheartedly. It wasn't a matter of fighting and killing, so how could he intervene? This matter seems quite troublesome. Lu Chen sighed softly and said to Xian. Xian wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, Brother Lu, since you're so powerful, can you help me? Lu Chen looked at Xian and saw that she was sitting there looking at him with eyes full of expectation. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, Why should I help you? What's in it for me? Xian was stunned as if she didn't expect Lu Chen to suddenly say something like this. After a while she stammered, this Brother Lu No, I don't know. I think you're a good person and you treat me very well. I thought you'd help me. Lu Chen laughed involuntarily and said, Who told you that I'm a good person? You're too simple-minded. No wonder you're being forced. Xian's face was bitter as if she didn't know what to say. In the end she could only mumble, I just thought that Brother Lu helped me when we were in the disorienting lands, so I think you're a good person. Tisk. Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. He shook his head and thought for a while before saying, In any case, I'm not the kind of person you think I am. I can't work for free. If you want me to help you solve this matter, you'll have to pay me something. Oh, that's what I should do, Xian said repeatedly. Brother Lu, what do you want? As long as I have it, I'll give it to you. Looking at her anxious expression, it was obvious that she wanted nothing more than to get rid of He Gang's entanglement. It was obvious that she was about to go crazy. If that's the case, then repay me with your body, Lu Chen said. Xian was instantly dumbstruck. Her mouth was wide open as if she had turned into a stone. After a moment, she suddenly saw a faint smile hanging on the corner of Lu Chen's mouth. Only then did she suddenly come back to her senses. She stomped her feet in embarrassment and anger and said angrily, Big Brother Lu, what are you doing? Lu Chen smiled and said, What's wrong? You can't take it after just one sentence? Lu Chen said, I saw that when He Gang came to pester you, you looked embarrassed, angry and panic-stricken from beginning to end. You didn't even have the strength to fight back. Are your feelings then the same as now?
Xian seemed to understand, but her cheeks still felt a little hot.
She said in a low voice. More or less.
Humph. Lu Chen sneered with a bit of undisguised mockery. Xian suddenly felt that her face was even hotter. Then she heard Lu Chen say, I'll help you with this matter, but I haven't thought about what the reward will be. I'll owe you for now. Just remember to help me with this matter in the future. Okay. Hearing Lu Chen's words, Xian suddenly felt that she had seen a ray of light in the darkness. She hurriedly agreed and then looked at Lu Chen with a face full of expectation, as if she had seen an omnipotent god. Her gaze was so hot that even a thick-skinned person like Lu Chen couldn't bear it.
He glared at her and then said, I've thought about this matter from beginning to end.
I think your biggest problem now is that you have no way to ask for help. If your Jin Dan stage master comes out, maybe you won't be in such a difficult situation? Xian said without hesitation. Of course, Master Dongfang loves me the most. If he comes out, he definitely won't sit idly by. Well, then it's clear. The most important thing now is to let you endure until your master comes out.
There are ways, very simple, 2 ways.
Xian's eyes suddenly brightened. Looking at Lu Chen with some admiration, she quickly said, Brother Lu, quickly teach me. Lu Chen stretched out the first finger and said, First, you pretend to be courteous to He Gang and pretend to be perfunctory. First you can calm him down. If necessary, you can even let him take advantage of you. Endure until your master comes out and officially accepts you as a disciple. Then you can turn hostile. Xian was stunned for a moment.
She suddenly shook her head and resolutely said, No.
Lu Chen looked at her and asked, Why? Xian's face was full of disgust and said, That person is so disgusting now. Every time he comes to pester me, he talks and does things like he wants to eat me. I can't stand it. Lu Chen nodded to show that he understood and then said, Since that's the case, then there's a second way. But you should also understand the current situation, so to use this method, it depends on whether you are ruthless enough. Xian looked a little confused and said, Brother Lu, what do you want me to do? What do you mean ruthless enough?
Lu Chen smiled and waved at her.
Xian walked to his side and slightly bent down. Then she saw Lu Chen whispering something in her ear. As Xian listened, the expression on her face slowly changed. First, she was indescribably shocked. Then her body trembled slightly, as if she was excited and afraid. In the middle, there was a complicated expression of blushing. After a long while, she straightened her body in a daze and turned to look at Lu Chen. She said with some difficulty, Is this okay? At this moment, it was the dead of night. That man was silent, just quietly sitting by the table in the pavilion. For some reason, Xian suddenly had a strange illusion. The man in front of her seemed to suddenly become especially strange. At that moment, Xian only felt that the surrounding darkness was like a tide, surrounding that man, making his face unclear, making him hide in the darkness. Even that faint smile that he occasionally revealed seemed to carry a trace of the coldness and sternness of the night. After a while, sitting in the darkness, Lu Chen said indifferently, I already said, I'm not a good person. Chapter 93. Time flowed by as the moon set and the clouds rose. Within the enormous Kunlun Mountains, countless people were busy walking their own paths. However, compared to the towering mountains, people were often like extremely tiny ants. They were busy doing their own thing all day long, yet they forgot to raise their heads to look at the boundless sky. Xian walked on the road of Rockpan Mountain, her face calm, without any extra expression. She was an official disciple, so she did not have to work all day long in exchange for a meager pay like the handyman disciples. However, she still needed help with some things like sorting and identifying spiritual materials. Besides, this kind of work also had great benefits. She could identify many useful spiritual materials, familiarize herself with their properties, and lay a solid foundation for her future alchemy or exploration. There were many huge rocks on Rockpan Mountain. One of the branch halls of Bai Chao Tang was built on the big rocks on the mountain. From afar, one could see the flying eaves and blue tiles. It looked extraordinary. Xian was not the only one on the road. There were many disciples of Bai Chao Tang who had the same status as her coming and going. Many people noticed Xian, and many people pointed at her and whispered to each other. Rumors were bound to spread at all times. Xian didn't look at her fellow disciples. As she walked,
The conversation she had with Lu Chen a few days ago, as well as some of the instructions he had given her after that, couldn't help but echo in her mind. In the vicinity of Rock Mountain, from 100 Herb Hall's branch, are there any female Jindan masters with profound cultivation and bad tempers?
This was what Lu Chen had asked her that day. There are many female disciples in Baichao Tang. There are also a few female Jindan friar who are successful in cultivation. The one who came recently is Martial Uncle Yen of Melaleuca japonica. She is strict, and all the disciples are afraid of her. Great. God is on your side.
But the great cultivators of Jindan State never bother to know, and they don't care about our trivial matters.
Then we'll force her to know, force her to take care of it. Ah, how can I do that?
That depends on whether you are ruthless enough. Big Brother Lu, you're saying that again. I always feel scared when I hear it. The warm sunlight shone down on Xianxia's body, making her feel a trace of warmth. She took a deep breath and forced herself to reveal a trace of a smile before walking towards the hall.
The day passed uneventfully.
In the afternoon, Xianxia walked out of the main hall and began to walk down the mountain. When she arrived at the foot of the mountain, she pretended to casually glance at the flat and spacious spiritual fields. She saw many odd-job disciples working hard in the spiritual fields at the foot of the mountain. Unsurprisingly, she found a familiar face among them. Inconspicuous, Lu Chen stood in a spiritual field and smiled at her from afar. For some reason, seeing that smile, Xianxia seemed to feel a little more support in her heart, and her originally panicked mind calmed down a little. But before she could think of what to do, suddenly, a gloomy and even somewhat hostile voice suddenly came from not far away.
Junior Sister E. What a coincidence. We meet again.
Xianxia's heart jumped, and her hands subconsciously clenched into fists. Then she turned her head to look, and what entered her eyes was that extremely ugly and frightening face. Xianxia slowly lowered her head, and there seemed to be a little fear on her face. She said in a low voice, "Senior brother He." Gang looked at Xianxia's pretty face, and saw that the fear and weakness not only did not damage her beauty in the slightest, but instead added a bit of sadness and delicateness to her beauty. He felt as if a scorching flame suddenly burned in his heart, like a wild beast suddenly roaring in his body. His eyes revealed a look of greed and desire, but his tone was very calm. He only smiled and said, "Junior Sister E, I have something to say to you." Xianxia slightly raised her eyes, looked at that face, and found that when Gang smiled, the scar on his face twitched, that face became more and more frightening. She couldn't help but take a step back and after 2 hurried breaths said, "Senior brother He, if you have something to say, you can say it here."
Here.
Gang sneered, looked at the many handyman disciples in the surrounding spiritual fields, and a look of contempt appeared in his eyes. He said, "There are too many people here, Junior Sister E. Let's go to a place with fewer people to talk." As he spoke, Gang walked towards the forest that day. Xianxia's expression changed slightly, and she looked a little hesitant. Gang suddenly turned back and with a ferocious look, he shouted fiercely, "Junior Sister E." Xianxia's face showed a painful expression, but in the end, she finally slowly walked out, and followed Gang into the forest. This scene fell into the eyes of many handyman disciples, and even many official disciples of Baichao Tang who passed by and watched from afar also saw it. For a moment, everyone looked at each other. The forest was very quiet. Gang looked very happy that Xianxia had to follow him, and he walked in front proudly. Xianxia, on the other hand, slowly followed behind him. Lu Chen's words to her echoed in her mind. Every single word sounded simple and clear, but it was as if a knife was stabbing into her heart, and it was filled with pain and determination.
I told you to be ruthless, not to be ruthless to Gang, because it's useless. Nowadays, there are countless rumors about Gang. Even if you kill him, you won't be able to shut people's mouths. Instead, you'll become the target of gossip, and your family will definitely not be able to withstand Yi's vengeance. Gang is the one who wants you, and wants to skin you alive. I don't know about Yi, but maybe someone like him needs all the resources to help him break through to the Jindan. He might even be tempted by your family's property. What do you think? You'll lose both your wealth and your family. Can you stand it? Can't stand it? That's why you have to be ruthless to yourself. You have to be ruthless to yourself to the point where everyone is scared and in disbelief. Then, everyone will believe you. In this world, How can there be such a comfortable thing as reaping without sowing? Even if there is, it's not between you and me. That's why you have to be ruthless to yourself. Lu Chen said with a smile. Xian recalled that night. Lu Chen's voice and blurry face in the dark. She suddenly shuddered. She stared fixedly at He Gang, who had stopped in front of her and turned around to look at her with a hateful smile. Her eyes twitched, and her body trembled slightly. All of this fell into He Gang's eyes. He looked at Xian as if he was looking at a weak little chick. A tyrannical emotion seemed to rise from his heart. That terrifying scene of countless ferocious black dogs barking and biting each other flashed across his mind, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. He was scared. He was scared to death. Every time he dreamed of that scene, he would be scared to the point of peeing his pants. And every time he saw Xian's beautiful face, he would angrily think, why? Why was she able to escape safely, while he had to suffer like that? Everything was her fault. I want to let her taste that kind of pain. Ruthlessly ravage her, torture her, make her scream in pain. He crazily imagined it, as if this was the only way he could feel uncontrollable pleasure. It was at this time, He Gang heard Xian open her mouth, and with a trembling voice she said, Senior brother, don't force me like this, okay? That young girl seemed like she was about to cry. There were tears in the corner of her eyes, and as if she had gathered all her courage, she said this to him. Chapter 94. He Gang sneered, his white teeth peeking out from his missing mouth. He looked especially ferocious, like a wolf or tiger. Xian took another step back and said in a trembling voice, Don't force me, senior brother He Gang spat and said fiercely, I want to force you, so what? I'll tell you clearly, I want you. Follow me faithfully for the rest of your life. When my big brother reaches the golden core or nascent soul stage, you and your clan will enjoy endless wealth and glory. Xian's face was pale as she shook her head. After a while, she smiled bitterly. Our family. So you really coveted our family property? He Gang suddenly frowned, as if he felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't think of what it was, so he didn't bother to say more. With a wild laugh he strode towards Xian, and at the same time, reached out to grab her and said with a smile, Junior sister I've missed you for a long time today you. Clang! A crisp sound abruptly interrupted He Gang's words. His body stopped, only to see Xian pull out a sharp dagger and hold it horizontally in front of her. Her face carried a bit of determination, mixed with a bit of pain and despair, and even a bit of madness that He Gang had never seen before. It was vaguely similar to the look in He Gang's eyes before. He Gang jumped in fright, but he sneered. What are you doing? Trying to scare me with a dagger? Stab me if you dare. Let's see if anyone from your family can survive after you kill me. Xian gritted her teeth and stared blankly in front of her. Her vision blurred and she could almost hear her own painful and hopeless question from that day. Why, Brother Lu, why? They were the ones who bullied me, but you want me to be cruel to myself? Lu Chen's calm yet cold voice came from the darkness, echoing in her ears. Because you're weak. But there's no justice in this world. Yes, there's no justice, there's no reason. This is how the world works. Either you lie down and admit defeat and allow others to bully you, or you try your best to find some methods within your power, even if those methods seem painful and uncomfortable. You want me to give you justice and righteousness? I'm sorry, I don't have any. I'm not a good person. I can only teach you these things. Ah! Xian suddenly screamed, like a little beast that was forced into a desperate situation. Her fear was not directed towards the ugly man in front of her, but rather towards an invisible aura. She trembled all over. When He Gang saw this, he was so excited that his body was trembling. He let out a roar, and his eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly rushed over and grinned, Stinking whore, today I'll call you. Damn whore, today I'll call you. The low muffled sound wasn't loud, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder. He Gang instantly stopped in his tracks and looked at Xian with a stunned and incredulous expression. That girl, that beautiful girl, had a pained expression on her face at this moment. However, her hand was gripping the dagger tightly, and she had stabbed it into her own body with a backhand. The dagger was incomparably sharp and pierced through her left shoulder. It could be imagined that Xian used all her strength. Dark red blood gushed out like a fountain and dyed half of Xian's clothes red. Xian's pale lips trembled slightly. She slowly pulled the dagger out from her flesh. The pain was like a tide that was about to drown this fragile woman. There were a few times when she felt that she was about to collapse.
She was about to be unable to bear it, but for some reason she still stood there, standing in the pool of blood, coldly looking at the dumbfounded he gang opposite her.
Suddenly, she felt a sense of pleasure amidst the pain. That ugly man was not as strong as she thought. Then she slowly lowered her head. Looking at the bloody wound, she shook her head. That ghostly cold voice seemed to be emotionless. Vaguely, it was saying terrible words to her. Since you have decided to be ruthless, then be more ruthless. Since you have decided to do it, then you must do it to the extreme. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? She smiled bitterly.
Within the bloody light, there was a terrifying decisiveness that shouldn't have been present at her age.
She suddenly screamed, and then held the blade upside down. She suddenly flipped it over and directly cut off her own flower-like, jade-like face. He gang was scared silly. At this time, he was really scared out of his wits. He stood there, dumbfounded at this bloody scene. He was completely at a loss, and his mind was blank. The feeling of the cold blade cutting through flesh made one's body feel like it was going to fall apart. Xianxia's body trembled non-stop. She gasped for breath, as if this was the only way she could persevere. But in her weak body, there seemed to be an unimaginable terrifying power that kept her going until now. Fresh blood dyed her body red. It was a ghastly sight to behold. However, she was like a phoenix rising from nirvana in the pool of blood.
She looked down at the ugly man from above and saw the fear in his eyes.
Thus, there was a bit of contempt in her eyes.
She thought to herself, so what Brother Lu said was true.
She laughed maniacally, shook her head, and did not look at He gang again. She suddenly raised the dagger and slashed her clothes, directly cutting several wounds on her body. In an instant, blood spurted out.
Then, she threw the dagger away and used her hands to tear open her clothes, revealing a piece of originally snow-white soft skin that was now dyed red with blood. The beautiful body that was hidden under the clothes looked unusually bright red, and there was a kind of tragedy that could not be looked at directly.
Then, she raised her head again. This forest was as quiet as the bridge of helplessness in the underworld. It was like the terrifying sea of blood in the hell of evil spirits. She didn't know why, but there was suddenly a relieved smile on her face. She just smiled like that.
Then, she suddenly let out an incomparably sharp scream.
She staggered out of the forest. Along the way, blood flowed all over the ground, dyeing the entire road red. He gang still hadn't come back to his senses. He stood there in a daze.
His eyes fell on the dark red pool of blood on the ground.
It seemed that he still hadn't broken free from the tragic scene that had just occurred. After a while, outside the forest, there was a sudden commotion. Some people cried out, some people shouted angrily. There was also a woman's voice that was already crying. Someone, quickly come and save junior sister E. Medicine. Who has medicine to stop the bleeding? Why is she bleeding so much? No. Quickly go to the mountain and ask Martial Aunt Yen to come down. Only she can save junior sister E. In the midst of the chaos, the commotion became bigger and bigger. It seemed to gradually converge into a raging tide, crazily surging in all directions. In the spirit field behind the crowd, a man stood far away and watched this terrifying scene from beginning to end. When the crowd gathered, he expressionlessly raised his head and looked at the sky. The sky was blue and cloudless. Today was a sunny day. Chapter 95. The incident that took place at the foot of Rock Mountain that day was witnessed by many Bai Chao Tang disciples and even more Chor's disciples. When the blood-soaked woman staggered out of the forest, the horrifying scene instantly shocked everyone. Dark red blood flowed on that beautiful face, piercing into everyone's eyes like a sharp knife, causing their eyes to sting. They held their breath and tensed up involuntarily. Like a boulder thrown into the water, it instantly set off a monstrous wave. The Kunlun party was, after all, a prestigious and upright sect. Jean Dan Friar Melaleuca Japonica, who was in charge of the Bai Chao Tang sect on Rock Mountain, immediately rushed down the mountain after receiving the news to protect Xian and heal her. At the same time, someone noticed that someone was trying to sneak out of the forest. It was He gang, so he immediately shouted for them to expose him. Thinking of all the things that happened before, the crowd was instantly agitated and many people cursed out loud. However, He Gang's elder brother, He was too famous. Although the crowd was angry, no one dared to stop them. At this moment, the white-haired Melaleuca japonica suddenly appeared next to He Gang without saying a word. Then, she slapped him hard in the face. That afternoon, at the edge of the forest at the foot of Rock Mountain, everyone heard the crisp sound of bones breaking and the man's heart-wrenching scream. Of course, no one paid attention to him. By evening, the incident had spread throughout the Kunlun party and caused a sensation in all sections. The family of Kunwu City had rushed to the mountain after hearing the news. It was said that the scene was so tragic that the girl's mother fainted when she saw her daughter. Xian's father and other relatives and friends were all furious. Bai Chao Tang sect was one of the most important sects in the Kunlun party. It was powerful and well-established. In just one day, 2 Yuanying Zhenren and 7 Jin Dan Friar immortals came directly to Rock Mountain. At night, the huge mountain was still brightly lit. Countless people came in and out. The sky was full of colorful lights and colorful rainbows flew across the sky, making the moon and stars dim. It was the immortal masters and Zhenren who came on clouds and wind, like the eve of a storm. He Gang wanted to escape, but Melaleuca japonica broke his bones on the spot and caught him. He was thrown at the foot of Rock Mountain, howling and screaming.
No one came near and no one dared to save him.
When night fell, someone from the Rock Mountain passed down the order. He Gang was tied up and hung on a big tree in front of the mountain, facing the boundless spirit fields and countless onlookers of the odd job disciples. This was, of course, an undisguised insult and venting of anger. He Gang screamed and defended himself, saying that Xian was a bitch and that she did everything herself. She stabbed herself and it had nothing to do with He Gang. In the cold mountain wind, He Gang's voice gradually became hoarse and weak. In the end, others could only hear him calling his brother's name in a low voice. But this night, He never showed up. He Gang was also hung for the whole night. Within the sects of Kunlun, every hall on every mountain peak seemed to have smelled something that night. Everyone was silent. And among the huge mountains of Kunlun, there seemed to be a sense of mutual hostility that night. The next morning, there was news from the powerful Heavenly Soldier Hall, which was in charge of the magic weapon refining and the forging of celestial weapons in the Kunlun party. Dukan Zhenren, who had a high reputation in the Heavenly Soldier Hall, summoned his most beloved disciple, He, to the famous Heavenly Fire Hall of the Kunlun party and reprimanded him for a long time.
He knelt on the ground and did not dare to speak.
It was even said that Dukan Zhenren in his rage, directly hit and slapped and kicked He, causing He to repeatedly kowtow in front of the hall until his face was bruised and bleeding. However, when the news came, the stone mountain did not seem to be moved at all. The entire mountain was silent, like an angry giant beast, coldly looking at its opponent in the Kunlun mountain range. The atmosphere in the Kunlun party became more and more tense the next day. The disciples of the Heavenly Soldier Hall suddenly could not get elixirs from the elixir room. In the argument, the disciples on both sides, especially the disciples of Bai Chao Tang, became more and more provocative. The situation even seemed to be worsening. But on this night, the head of the Kunlun party, Immortal Idol Month, suddenly arrived at the Stone Mountain. Together with her was the chief elder of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukan Zhenren. They first went to visit Xian, who was seriously injured and on the verge of death. Of course, under the care and treatment of so many powerful cultivators of Bai Chao Tang, Xian's injuries had greatly improved. Then, Immortal Idol Month came forward to host the meeting. She summoned Dukan Zhenren and the 2 immortal masters of Bai Chao Tang, Qian Deng and Ming Zhu. They found a quiet room to talk behind closed doors. They chatted for half a day. However, when they walked out of the door, everyone on the Rock Mountain saw the 4 highly respected Yuanying Zhenren smiling. They were like celestial beings who did not eat the food of the mortal world. They greeted each other, looked forward to the bright future of Kunlun, talked about the hardships on the road of cultivation, and only said that the celestial path was brilliant, and that it was the right path of the mortal world. Dukan Zhenren then took his leave and floated away. During this time, he never mentioned He Gang, who was still hanging on the big tree at the foot of the stone mountain. The people of Bai Chao Tang also seemed to have forgotten about this matter. After this, the matter quickly subsided. He Gang was released after being hung for 3 days. His brother, He, picked him up and sent him out of Kunlun Mountain. He found a house in Kunwu City to stay and recuperate. It seemed that he wouldn't return to the mountain for a while. After finishing this matter,
He immediately announced to everyone that he would follow his master's order and immediately go into closed-door training to comprehend and break through the incomparably difficult Jindan realm.
Everything was like a breeze blowing. After the turbulence, it finally gradually calmed down. The majestic Kunlun was still the same as before. Everything was as usual. Late at night, the stone mountain was no longer as lively and tense as it was a few days ago. After the lights dimmed, there was only silence. It was unknown how many people had entered the land of dreams at this moment. The darkness of the night seemed to be everywhere. A shadow that blended with the darkness quietly moved forward in the darkness.
It silently passed through the houses, bypassed the guards, and finally stopped outside a house in the depths of the mountain.
The window was gently closed.
As if the night wind blew in, it made a squeaking sound and swayed a little. On the bed in the house, Xianxia turned over and rubbed her eyes sleepily. Suddenly, her body trembled and she sat up abruptly. She found that there was suddenly an extra shadow beside her bed.
But before she could scream, a large hand had already covered her mouth, forcing her to swallow all her cries. Chapter 96. Wu.
Wu? Xianxia let out a muffled cry and struggled desperately, but the black figure suddenly leaned over and whispered something in her ear.
Xianxia's body suddenly stiffened, and then she stopped struggling. She calmed down. Only her eyes in the darkness still revealed a trace of horror. The hand covering her mouth slowly withdrew, and the black figure still sat on the edge of her bed. A pair of bright eyes appeared in the darkness, and then his appearance was gradually seen clearly. It was Lu Chen.
"Brother Lu,"
Xianxia softly called out, and after the shock in her eyes, there was finally some joy. She did not know why, but she suddenly felt sour in her eyes, and after a moment, 2 lines of tears silently flowed down from her pale face. The tears streaked across her white and tender skin, and the bandaged wound on one side of her face was still not removed, making her look particularly miserable. Lu Chen quietly looked at the girl sitting in the darkness crying silently, sighed, and then reached out to wipe away the tears on her face, and said, "Don't cry, you did well." Xianxia stared at him in a daze, her lips slightly trembling, and the scenes of these days flashed through her mind. Suddenly, she realized that so many people from the same sect, so many relatives, and even her parents, seemed to be separated from them by a layer. In these few days, she desperately suppressed her fear, endured her nervousness, and only at this time, in this dark and quiet night, in front of this man who seemed to be one with the darkness like a shadow, did she suddenly feel a trace of relief. He knew all the secrets, and there was no need to pretend anything in front of him. Xianxia just looked at him like this, and unknowingly, tears flowed down her face again, and even her voice trembled and choked. "Lu, brother Lu! I'm so scared." Lu Chen raised his hand, as if he wanted to comfort Xianxia, but when he just raised his hand, he suddenly felt a warm body jumping into his arms, tightly hugging his arm, desperately suppressing her trembling voice and crying, "I'm so scared, brother Lu. At that time I was so scared, I was in so much pain. I've never been in so much pain in my life. I saw myself bleeding so much my whole body was covered in blood. I even cut my own face. From now on I am an ugly person." Sob sob, sob 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 sob. Lu Chen's hands froze in the air. For a moment he did not know whether to raise or let go, and could only let Xianxia vent in his arms. After a while he found that Xianxia did not seem to show signs of calming down, so he could only gently pat the girl's shoulder and whispered, okay, it's all over." Perhaps his comfort had some effect. Xianxia's crying slowly quieted down. After a while, she slowly left Lu Chen's body, lowered her head and sat on the bed again, but kept using her hand to wipe the tears on her face. A hand held a handkerchief and handed it to her. Xianxia hesitated for a moment, took it, and while wiping her face, she whispered, "Thank you."
Well, this is the final result of the matter.
The room was still dark. In the darkness, Lu Chen and Xianxia sat on the same bed, somewhat strangely and somewhat inexplicably ambiguous. Separated by some distance, they listened to Lu Chen talk about what happened these days. Finally, as if coming to a conclusion, Lu Chen said, "If nothing unexpected happens, he will be grounded for a very long time in closed-door meditation, and He Gang is currently recuperating in Kunwu City, but it will be very difficult for him to return to the Kunlun party. Perhaps he will be expelled from the sect." Xianxia's breathing seemed to quicken in the darkness for a while, and then with a hint of disbelief she said, "Really? Really?" Xianxia was silent for a moment, and then she let out a long breath, as if a big stone that had been pressing on her heart for a long time had finally been moved. After a while she sighed softly. Our Kunlun party still has its justice. But this time, because of me, they actually alarmed so many seniors and elders, really. Before she finished speaking, Xian suddenly saw Lu Chen, who was next to her, turn his head to look at her. A pair of bright but deep eyes stared at her. For some reason, Xian suddenly felt weak in her heart, and her voice involuntarily dropped. After a moment she stammered, Did I say something wrong? Lu Chen looked at her with a faint smile and said, Do you really think that Bai Chao Tang and Heavenly Soldier Hall made such a big movement just for you? Xian was stunned. After a while she said with a stutter, Didn't I? In the beginning, of course it was for you. That day when you came out of the forest, the scene was bloody and tragic. No one could stand it. So, including your martial uncle Melaleuca Japonica, she angrily made a move because she couldn't help you. But what kind of influential family is the Kunlun party? There are so many masters and recluses in Bai Chao Tang. How could they rashly fall out with such an important hall like Heavenly Soldier Hall for the sake of you, an insignificant new disciple? Before, even you didn't dare to believe that it would be like this, right? Xian silently nodded and said, Then why on earth, Brother Lu? Lu Chen smiled and said, Because there are still people who don't like the He brothers. Who? Just like you, a disciple of a sect from an aristocratic family in Kunwu City. Xian was startled and said with some doubt, That can't be. Although my family is also one of the aristocratic families in Kunwu City, to be honest, our Yi family has been very ordinary these years. We haven't produced any particularly outstanding talents, and the other aristocratic families rarely pay attention to us. Lu Chen said indifferently, It has nothing to do with this. It's just that all the people from aristocratic families have different circumstances since childhood, so they naturally more or less have a sense of superiority. When some people see you, won't they think of something else? What if the person that he gang likes is a girl from another aristocratic family? Aristocratic families have confidence, strength, and influence, so they naturally aren't afraid. But what about those small and medium-sized aristocratic families? Do they deserve to be bullied by this rising young man? Taking a step back, even if they are aristocratic families now, what if they become like the Yi family in a few decades or hundreds of years? At that time, what will their daughters do when they meet this kind of person? He sat quietly in the darkness and looked at the injured girl. He was calm and even faintly cold as he said, So the key to this matter lies in the place where it happened. If you were bullied by He gang in the land of chaos, or even worse than today, the Kunlun party's reaction wouldn't be as big. But this time, it happened in the Kunlun party and under the eyes of all the Kunlun disciples. This is a slap in the face of the several hundred aristocratic families in Kunwu City. It would be strange if they didn't kill the He brothers. Xian stared blankly at Lu Chen, who was sitting in the shadows. Looking at his deep eyes that were faintly discernible in the darkness, she suddenly said softly, Brother Lu. When you first helped me think of the idea, did you already think of everything that would happen later? Chapter 97. Lu Chen glanced at Xian and said, Why do you ask? Xian lowered her head silently. After a long while she whispered, Nothing. I just feel that Brother Lu, you are thinking so far ahead. You are so powerful. Do you regret letting me help you? Xian's body trembled slightly. She quickly shook her head and said, No. I didn't mean that. You helped me for my own good. I know that. I am grateful to you from the bottom of my heart. I am especially. Do you remember that you promised to do something for me? Lu Chen suddenly interrupted her. Xian was stunned for a moment and said, Yes. Lu Chen said lightly, That's good. After this matter, no matter what, 100 Herb Hall will value you even more. Plus, you're someone that Dongfang Tao has taken a liking to and your talent isn't bad. So your position in 100 Herb Hall in the future will be much better than it is now. This is good for both of us. Xian was speechless. She didn't know what to say for a moment. Lu Chen stood up and said, It's late. You should rest early. I'm leaving. Xian thought of something and said, Brother Lu, I remember that there are guards outside. How did you get in? Lu Chen stood in the darkness and smiled slightly. He didn't answer her question. He stepped back and quickly merged into the darkness.
Xian widened her eyes and looked towards the darkness, only to see a few faint ripples suddenly appearing on the quiet surface of the water in the deep darkness. When she looked again carefully, there was no sign of anyone. Silently shuttling through the darkness, like the shadow of the moon, he came down from the top of the rock mountain without anyone noticing.
Lu Chen looked up at the night sky and saw that it was already late at night. It was already past midnight. It was already the curfew time in the Kunlun party. Speaking of this curfew, it was a special rule in the Kunlun party. Other cultivation sects rarely had such restrictions.
After all, the cultivators who practiced immortality and refinement were all strong and energetic.
It was not a big deal even if they didn't sleep for a day and night. But in the Kunlun party, this rule of forbidding the disciples to go out after midnight had been around for a long time.
It was said that it could even be traced back to the early days of the Kunlun party, which had a history of thousands of years.
In short, the Kunlun sect was a famous sect with a lot of rules. Coupled with the name of restraining its disciples to concentrate on cultivation, it was actually not particularly strange. Just like that, they persisted year after year. But of course, the so-called curfew could not be completely empty. Such a large mountain, such a large territory, if there were no guards patrolling, wouldn't it have been looted by countless thieves?
Therefore, in the darkness of the night, although the nearby mountain path was quiet, there would occasionally be a group of patrolling guards passing by.
Lu Chen walked quietly on the mountain road. When there were guards, he would often hide in advance. The guards, who were usually at least in the Foundation realm, seemed to have never noticed a low-level handyman disciple like him wandering outside late at night. Rock Mountain was where the official disciples of the Bai Chao Tang lived. The handyman disciples lived some distance away. Lu Chen walked and soon passed a fork in the road. A stone staircase extended up from the side of the mountain road. Lu Chen paused and remembered that this was the pavilion where he and Xian met late at night a few days ago. Thinking about what he said that night and Xian's appearance at that time, then thinking about how things seemed to have turned upside down in just a few days, Lu Chen felt a little emotional, but he did not intend to stop and continued to walk forward. The footsteps gradually faded away and Lu Chen's figure also disappeared into the darkness. But after a while, in this quiet mountain forest, as the cold night wind blew, a blurry figure suddenly walked out from the gloomy pavilion halfway up the mountain. The figure was that of a slender woman. Because it was too dark, it was impossible to see her appearance clearly. One could only faintly see that she was standing on the edge of the pavilion, gazing in the direction that Lu Chen had left. The night wind blew, causing her clothes and hair to float. A flash of light flitted through the night. It was a scarlet feather shawl draped over her shoulder. She silently stood in the darkness. After a while, she turned around and walked toward the summit. The days in Kunlun Mountain once again calmed down. The He brothers went into seclusion, and Mount Li went into seclusion. Afterwards, this matter was quickly forgotten. Everyone once again began to live the same leisurely days as before, cultivating, refining, and competing to become immortals. In the spiritual fields at the base of Rockpan Mountain, the various kinds of spiritual plants had also reached the point of maturity. Bai Chao Tang sent people down to take the harvest with great familiarity. Then, according to the rules, the surplus harvested spiritual plants were given to the odd job disciples. Afterwards, they exchanged them on the spot. Basically everyone exchanged them for spirit stones. The number of spirit stones varied, but this was the first time that most of the odd job disciples had extra money on hand. Thus, before they began planting the next batch of spiritual fields, they had half a month of comfortable days to pass. Many people were already calculating what kind of miraculous medicine they should exchange for to assist in their cultivation, or perhaps they should inquire about whether the sect had better cultivation methods they could purchase. Lu Chen's harvest was also not bad. He had obtained 30 spirit stones, which was considered a lot among the odd job disciples. However, before the spirit stones had warmed up in his bosom, an uninvited guest came to find him. "Treat, Brother Lu." When Xian found Lu Chen, she was smiling so happily that even her eyes seemed to be squinting. Although on the night when she was injured, Xian still seemed to be a little uneasy, but as her injuries improved, she still secretly looked at Lu Chen in a new light. She secretly regarded him as her most trustworthy friend, often sneaking over to talk to him. On this day, after receiving the spirit stones, Xian came to his door to ask for some money. Lu Chen unhappily rolled his eyes at this smiling young girl. "Your family is obviously rich. Why do you always think of a pauper like me?" Xian smiled. That's not the same. It's especially delicious to eat your treat.
Lu Chen said, You've learned bad things. Xian pulled him away and said, That's because I learned bad things from you. Less nonsense. Let's go, let's go. Besides, I haven't seen Atsu for a long time. You always said it wasn't good to go up the mountain, so you left it in Kunwu City. It's so pitiful. Lu Chen couldn't dissuade her, so he had no choice but to follow her. However, he hadn't gone down the mountain for quite some time, so he also wanted to find some free time to go to Old Ma's place to take a look. The two of them walked all the way to the southern mountain gate of the Kunlun party. Just as they were about to pass under the majestic memorial archway of the mountain gate and leave the mountain, they suddenly saw a sudden commotion coming from below. The Kunlun disciples walking in front of them suddenly made way for a path. Soon after, a group of people walked over. Lu Chen and Xian didn't know what was going on. They were a bit puzzled, but they still followed the crowd and stood to the side. Before long, that group of people walked past them. The leader was an old man with white hair and a youthful complexion. He looked like an immortal, and his aura was truly extraordinary. He seemed to be an expert who had achieved the Tao. Walking next to this imposing old man was a little girl. She looked about 10 years old, had an ethereal temperament, and was extremely beautiful. Moreover, the most amazing thing about her was that despite her young age, she seemed to have a kind of cold and holy aura. She was like a white lotus on a snowy peak, making people not dare to approach her. Lu Chen, who was standing to the side, suddenly frowned. His gaze fell on the girl's face, and he discovered that he had seen this incomparably holy girl before.
Chapter 98.
Perhaps she sensed something. The girl, who had been expressionless and cold all along the way, suddenly glanced at the side of the road when she walked past Lu Chen.
Lu Chen happened to be looking at her as well. Their gazes met in midair. After a brief collision, they parted as if nothing had happened. The young lady with a peerlessly beautiful appearance, aloof and outstanding temperament went all the way up the mountain. It was only then that the numerous Kunlun disciples at the mountain gate heaved a sigh of relief. They whispered to each other, but it seemed that no one knew the young lady's identity. However, many people recognized the old man who walked at the front. He was the powerful Jin Dan friar Wuxia of their sect. His identity and status weren't simple. He was the junior brother of the current sect master of Kunlun, Reverend Idle Month. At the same time, he was also the second disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan, who cultivated in closed-door cultivation on the Winter Peak, one of the 4 wondrous peaks in the sky and clouds. The little girl, who was personally brought up the mountain by a person with strength and background that couldn't be underestimated, naturally attracted a lot of people's attention. Soon, some people guessed that she might be the new disciple that Master Wuxian had just accepted. That was the good fortune that the little girl had accumulated over several lifetimes. When Lu Chen walked out of the mountain gate, he looked back and saw that the group of people had already disappeared into the distance. His eyes flashed, but in the end, he gently shook his head and smiled. There was a strange expression on his face. "Brother Lu, what are you smiling about?" Xian asked when she saw his expression. "Nothing." Lu Chen answered perfunctorily and said with a smile, "Let's go. We'll go to Kunwu City and see if that stupid dog has starved to death." Xian agreed with a smile. Soon after, she suddenly glared at Lu Chen and said with a somewhat suspicious attitude, "Brother Lu, could it be that you entrusted the wrong person to make Atsu starve? Even if I starve to death, I won't be able to reach it." In the deserted Black Hill Pavilion, the fatty old ma angrily complained to Lu Chen. "I say, Lu Chen, where did you find such a vicious dog? He's too hateful." "Atsu is not a vicious dog." Xian's voice came from the side. At this moment, she was squatting on the ground with a smile on her face. She threw a few words here and then turned away. The shiny black dog Atsu was jumping around her happily, wagging its tail and rubbing its head against Xian's body. From time to time, it happily stuck out its tongue to lick Xian's face and hands, making Xian giggle non-stop. "What's wrong? You look a little haggard," Lu Chen said to old Ma with a smile. "Nonsense, you have such a dog at home, how can it make people happy?" Old Ma said angrily. "What's wrong with Atsu? I remember that this dog is very stupid, but it seems to be quite honest." Old Ma snorted and said, "I've never seen such a greedy dog. It seems to think about eating all day long." Other dogs need to eat for 3 days, but it can finish in 1 day. And no matter if it's raw or cooked, no matter where I hide, this dog always seems to be able to dig 3 feet into the ground and find me. In the end, I became so angry that I stopped buying food, and it actually began to steal the spirit herbs on my counter. Ha! Lu Chen was also a little surprised when he heard this. He said, "How can this be? I didn't notice it before." As he said this, he waved to Atsu and called out, "Atsu, come here." The black dog immediately jumped over happily. Its movements were vigorous, although its hind legs were still limping. Lu Chen squatted down and touched Atsu's head. He looked at it again and found that Atsu seemed to have grown a lot this time, and its fur was bright and smooth. It seemed that it really ate well. He looked up at Old Ma and smiled. Then, Old Ma glared at him. "You took good care of it," Lu Chen said to Old Ma seriously. "I think you are very suitable to raise a dog." "Raise your head." Old Ma waved his hand and said, "Take it away quickly, or I will kill it sooner or later." Lu Chen smiled and wanted to say something, but Xianxia next to him came over and said with a smile, "Brother Lu, let's take Atsu back to the mountain." "Ah, that's good." Before Lu Chen could speak, Old Ma had already come over and agreed with a smile, not giving Lu Chen a chance to refuse. Lu Chen pushed the fat man away and said to Xianxia, "I am still a handyman disciple. It is not convenient for me to take it up the mountain." Xianxia waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's okay. I can take Atsu up the mountain. I can raise it." Lu Chen shook his head and said with a smile, "You really do like this stupid dog a lot, huh?" Xian showed a loving expression on her face. She touched Atsu's head and said with a smile, "We have gone through hardships together, right, Atsu?" Atsu barked, "Woof, woof, woof." While Xian was playing with Atsu in the small courtyard, Lu Chen and Old Ma walked to the side of the veranda and whispered to each other while watching. "You know what happened to the He brothers?" "Yes," Old Ma responded, then glanced at Xian who was playing with Atsu, especially at the light scar on her cheek, and then said lightly, "I didn't know this little girl was so cruel." Lu Chen said, "There's nothing a person won't do when they're cornered." Old Ma turned to look at him and said, "Did others force her, or did you force her?" Lu Chen said, "If I force her, do you think she will still follow me?" "That's true." Old Ma admitted this point, then said, "Now that He Gang has been expelled from the sect, He didn't speak up for his only brother." Lu Chen said, "He has too many troubles." Many influential families in Kunwu City have a lot of hidden forces in the Kunlun party. Now everyone hates him. If he's smart, he'll hide from this storm and come out after at least a year of closed-door meditation. Old Ma smiled and nodded. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard Lu Chen say, "By the way, He Gang should still be hiding in Kunwu City, but he's hidden under the arrangement of his big brother. Go find that guy's whereabouts and residence. Then tell me." Old Ma was startled and said, "Do you have a grudge against He Gang?" "No." Old Ma hesitated for a moment, then glanced at Xian on the other side and said softly, "Little Lu, don't tell me. You want to help prevent her anger." Lu Chen's face was expressionless as he said, "No. I just feel that as long as this person doesn't die, he might be an idle person. Knowing a little bit of his whereabouts and movements might be useful in the future." Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "Okay, I'll handle this matter, but it may take some time to find him." "No hurry, take your time." Old Ma suddenly smiled and looked at Lu Chen, saying, "What value does that trashy gang have? Are you aiming at He? Lu Chen sighed and said, "That damn Baldy is used to being a hands-off shopkeeper. He just told me to look for him, then ran to the immortal city thousands of miles away. In this huge Kunlun party with countless disciples, it's really like looking for a needle in a haystack. But finally, I thought of something." Old Ma's eyes lit up and he said, "What is it?" Lu Chen smiled faintly and said, "That devil cult spy wants to do such a big thing, so he must be planning something big. He must also be an extremely outstanding talent. Of course, such a person is also outstanding in the Kunlun sect. Therefore, the direction that I'm looking for may be those elite figures. He should also be considered a powerful figure." Chapter 99. When they returned to the mountain, in front of the mountain gate of the Kunlun party, as expected, the two people with the black dog were stopped. However, as a handyman disciple, Lu Chen couldn't say anything, while Xian just hugged Atsu tightly,
and then silently looked at the few guarding disciples of the Kunlun party who stopped them. After a pleading look appeared on her face, the guarding disciples looked at each other, and then quickly let them go. The Kunlun party generally does not allow these cats and dogs to go up the mountain. Usually, those who do so will be stopped by the guarding disciples at the mountain gate. While walking on the mountain road of Kunlun, Xian said to Lu Chen with a little pride, "But I specifically checked the sect rules. This matter is too small, so small that our ancestors did not include this matter in the sect rules at all. And Kunlun Mountain is so big. Although there are no monsters, there are all kinds of mountain cats and small beasts in the mountains at the edge. How can they really be banned?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "Smart." Xian stuck out her tongue and smiled. Then she leaned over and patted the head of Atsu, who was following her, and sighed. "In fact, those senior brothers know about me, and they feel sorry for me. This is also good. Being able to let Atsu go up the mountain with me, at least my suffering was not in vain." Lu Chen laughed. After walking for a while, the two were about to separate. Unexpectedly at this time, Atsu habitually followed Lu Chen, which made Xian so angry that she hugged Atsu, the heartless black dog, and tried to persuade it to go with her. Who knew that the stupid dog Atsu was not grateful, and it was determined to follow Lu Chen. In the end, the helpless Xian could only wave goodbye to them with a sad face. Fortunately, now that they were living in the mountain of Kunlun, they could visit Atsu at any time. After Xian walked far away, Lu Chen walked back to his residence with Atsu. At the same time, he looked at Atsu, who was running back and forth excitedly because it came to a new place, and he was a little confused. Why did this lame black dog insist on following him? In the land of chaos, perhaps it could be explained by instinct, but after such a long time, including staying at Old Ma's place, this black dog was still so close to him. It seemed that something was not quite right. But after thinking about it, Lu Chen still could not figure out the reason, so in the end, he laughed at himself and thought that perhaps birds of a feather flocked together. The handyman disciples were the most numerous people in the huge population of the Kunlun party, but they had the lowest status. Lu Chen was one of the handyman disciples, so it was impossible for him to live on Rockpan Mountain like an official disciple like Xian, let alone an elite disciple like He who could have his own cave. The place where he lived was in a remote valley some distance away from Rockpan Valley. There were many terraced houses built here for the handyman disciples to live in. The house that belonged to Lu Chen was an inconspicuous one. It was not big, with a front door and a back window, gray walls and black tiles, and it looked a little depressing. After unlocking the door and pushing it open, Lu Chen habitually paused at the door for a moment, while Atsu, who was at his feet, curiously poked its head out from behind him and looked into the door. After a while, Lu Chen walked in and saw a simple table, chair, and a bed in the room. Other than that, there was almost no other furniture. Woof woof. Atsu barked twice, then jumped onto the bed. He lay there and grinned at Lu Chen, as if he couldn't stop smiling. "Stupid dog." Lu Chen looked at Atsu with a look of disgust. He walked over and patted its butt, driving Atsu away, and said, "You are so dirty. Can't you let me sleep?" Woof woof. Atsu shook its head and wagged its tail, then sniffed here and there in the room. After a while, it ran to the door and lay on the ground. The next day, Xian came looking for Atsu. At the same time, she brought a lot of food that Atsu liked to eat. The black dog was so happy that it jumped up and down. Woof woof. After feeding Atsu, Xian asked Lu Chen what did Atsu eat yesterday. Lu Chen confidently said that there were so many forests around, and he drove Atsu into the forest to find its own food, and it would come back when it was full. Xian was stunned for a long time, and she almost cried while hugging Atsu. She hated that Atsu had no conscience. It only wagged its tail and was affectionate with Xian, but once Xian wanted to take it away, Atsu would resist. After trying a few times, Xian finally gave up helplessly. She secretly decided to come here a few more times in the future, and take good care of this poor little dog that had no parents. Lu Chen directly ignored Xian's kindness. Atsu, on the other hand, would desperately suck up to them when there was food, and ignore them when they were full. They had no moral integrity to speak of. Days passed by, and in the blink of an eye, it was time for the second batch of spirit herbs to be planted. Lu Chen continued to live between the house and the spirit field, but the difference was that he often had a black dog by his side, which was always happy and active.
Of course, the disciples of the same sect were a little surprised that Lu Chen suddenly had a dog by his side, but it was not a big deal, so no one bothered. Atsu followed Lu Chen all day long. When Lu Chen was working in the spirit herb field, it would wander around the Stone Pan Valley. Sometimes, it would run into the forest, and sometimes, it would lie on the field and sleep. In this immortal sect that mortals yearned for, at least Atsu's life was very comfortable. After eating it would sleep. After waking up it would play. When it was tired, it would sleep and eat again. Even immortals could not compare to this happy life. After a period of time, one day at noon, Atsu left the Stone Pan Valley and ran into a forest at the edge of the Stone Pan Valley. During this period of time, it had been running around everywhere, and it had almost explored the surrounding terrain of the Stone Pan Valley. It had also left many urine traces in many places. The forest in front of them was located in the north of the Stone Pan Valley, and it was the last territory that it had not explored yet. Atsu stepped into the forest confidently, and as usual, patrolled the spiritual land and sniffed everywhere. The forest was very quiet. Occasionally, there was the sound of birds chirping, but no one knew where it came from in the dense branches. Sunlight shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, illuminating the flat path in the forest. Atsu sniffed the ground all the way. Sometimes it trotted, sometimes it walked slowly. Before it knew it, it had already walked a long distance. Suddenly, in a dark corner of the forest, a blurry shadow flashed past the dense foliage behind the trees. Atsu's ears suddenly pricked up, and it stopped suddenly. Then, it suddenly turned around and let out a low growl. Its eyes revealed a hint of fierceness. However, there was nothing behind it, only an empty forest. Atsu stared at the empty forest for a while, and gradually relaxed. There seemed to be some doubts in its eyes, but it still turned around and continued forward. After a few steps, a sound suddenly came from its side, as if someone had suddenly stepped on the forest ground and broken a dead branch. When the crack sound came, Atsu suddenly jumped up and bared its teeth in that direction, revealing its sharp fangs. In that direction, behind a thicket, there was a sudden movement of branches and leaves. Then, from behind the branches, a figure slowly appeared. An abnormally beautiful but somewhat cold little girl's face appeared behind the bushes. She looked at the black dog not far away with a strange look in her eyes. Chapter 100. In the depths of the forest, it was quiet. Separated by a clump of leaves, the black dog and the girl who suddenly appeared looked at each other. For some reason, Atsu looked a little nervous. It widened its eyes and stared unblinkingly at the girl behind the trees, especially when it suddenly raised its head and sniffed the air a few times with its nose. Atsu suddenly took a step back, and the hair on its neck slowly stood up. It let out a low growl and showed its sharp fangs to the little girl. My dog. The little girl behind the trees also looked at Atsu. She seemed a little surprised and a little curious. After a while, the branches and leaves suddenly shook, and then she walked out from behind the trees. She was like a fairy that had fallen into the mortal world, elegant and pure. With every step she took, the green branches and leaves seemed to sway gently for her. Her right hand was behind her back, and her left hand was at her side. She gradually showed a trace of a smile, as if she was naive, and walked towards Atsu. Roar! The growl in Atsu's throat suddenly became louder, as if it was full of wariness and hostility towards this beautiful girl. Huh! The girl seemed a little surprised. She stopped walking, but the way she looked at Atsu seemed to be a little more interested. After looking at Atsu with her clear and bright eyes, she pondered for a while, and then seemed to think of something and smiled slightly. Come here. The girl squatted down 6 or 7 feet away from Atsu. She still maintained the strange posture of her right hand behind her back, and then raised her left hand. Her skin was as white as snow, and it looked as delicate and beautiful as a spring onion. She waved at Atsu and deliberately lowered her voice, as if she was whispering to it. There was a trace of inexplicable strangeness in her voice, and she said, "Little dog, come here." Atsu stood there motionlessly, his eyes fixed on the strangely beautiful little girl, as if he didn't hear her greeting. The atmosphere in the forest was silent and a little stiff, but the girl didn't seem to care. She narrowed her eyes slightly, but her gaze seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. She looked at Atsu and smiled. Then she stretched out her white and tender fingers and said to Atsu, "Little dog, are you feeling very hungry? Do you feel like you can't eat your fill?" Atsu stared at her and made a muffled sound. He sounded angry and confused at the same time.
The young girl smiled and squatted on the ground. Her voice seemed to gradually carry an indescribable allure. It was almost hard to imagine that this ghostly voice actually came from the mouth of a little girl who was only about 10 years old.
I can help you. Come here, I'll give you something to eat.
A type of food that you truly desire but have never seen before, she smiled, looking as holy and beautiful as a fairy, but her pair of eyes seemed to be flashing a terrible and crazy flame from hell. Atu hesitated, as if he couldn't make up his mind. But after a while, he seemed to be unable to resist the mysterious temptation. Finally, he took a step forward and slowly walked up to the little girl. It no longer bared its teeth, and the hair on its neck also calmed down. Occasionally, its tail would shake, but most of the time, Atsu still looked at the little girl with doubt and a little caution. A satisfied smile slowly appeared on the girl's face. She stretched out her hand and gently touched Atu's forehead. Atu made a subtle movement and then heard the girl's voice become deep and ethereal. She slowly took out her right hand from behind her back. Eat, eat. I know what you desire most in your heart is actually this thing, she whispered to Atsu. Light shone through the gaps between the dense branches and leaves. Suddenly, there was a sudden silence in the depths of the forest. The wind stopped, and the trees were quiet. It was as if the whole world had stopped. A smear of dark red suddenly appeared, smearing this part of the world with a shocking trace of blood. Right in front of Atsu's eyes was her right hand that had just appeared. Fresh blood dripped down, flowing crazily and wantonly, rolling along that delicate skin. It was a bloody hand dripping with blood that would make anyone tremble in fear. The strong smell of blood instantly surged through the depths of the forest like a tide. Brother Lu! A clear call came from the ridge of the field. Lu Chen looked up and saw Xianxia standing there and waving at him with a smile. Lu Chen threw away the tools in his hand, clapped his hands to shake off the soil, and then walked over. He sat down on the edge of the field and said with a smile, "Why are you here?" Xianxia smiled and said, "I have nothing to do today, so I came over to have a look." Lu Chen curled his lips and sighed. There's such a big gap between people. I, an errand disciple, work myself half to death at the foot of the mountain all day and still don't earn much. You, on the other hand, earn a lot of money every few days. It's just that the divine disc in your stomach has a few more pillars than mine. Xian was originally squatting beside him. Hearing this, her cheeks turned red. She hit Lu Chen and said, "You're talking nonsense again." Lu Chen laughed. Xian looked around and asked, "Hey, where's Atsu? Doesn't it usually follow you here?" Lu Chen also looked around. Although he didn't see Atsu, he calmly said to Xian, "That stupid dog can't stay still. It likes to run around, and it likes to hide in the forest. It probably ran into some forest again." I see. Xian looked a little disappointed, but soon a trace of worry appeared on her face. She said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, Atsu just came here not long ago. This place is big, and there are forests and ravines everywhere. Will Atsu get lost?" Lu Chen waved his hand indifferently and said, "It's okay, you don't have to worry." Xian looked at Lu Chen helplessly. She didn't know why this brother Lu was so confident. Anyway, if it was her, she wouldn't be able to do it. But now that they couldn't find Atsu, she had no choice but to suppress the trace of worry in her heart and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, have you thought about what you want me to do?" Lu Chen looked at the mountains in the distance. Without turning his head, he casually replied, "What is it?" Xian said, "Didn't you say last time that if you help me come up with an idea, I will promise to do one thing for you?" "Oh, that thing." Lu Chen seemed to have come to a realization. He turned to look at Xian with a relaxed expression and said with a smile, "Why, are you in a hurry?" Xian shook her head and said, "Of course I'm not in a hurry. But that thing, you really helped me a lot. I want to repay Brother Lu." Lu Chen said, "I haven't thought about it yet. Let's talk about it when I think about it." Okay then. Xian seemed to feel a little sore in her legs after squatting for a long time. She directly landed on the ridge of the field beside Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at her and said, "Aren't you afraid of the soil?" Xian pursed her lips and said, "I'm not afraid. Back in the disorienting lands, I even rolled in the soil and water. Especially those insects. Drugs, it's much dirtier than here." Lu Chen laughed. Xianxia glared at him and waited until he stopped laughing. She said to Lu Chen, "But I recently heard that Bai Chao Tang will be recruiting some people to do spiritual power cultivation. If they do well, they may not only get some opportunities, but they may also be able to leave this spiritual field at the foot of the mountain. I wonder if you're interested?" Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked at Xianxia with a trace of surprise. "You actually knew about this in advance?"
Xianxia looked around.
Seeing that there was no one nearby, she smiled slightly proudly and said to Lu Chen in a low voice, "Although our family has been average these years, there are always some brothers and uncles who have joined the Kunlun party. One of them is in Bai Chao Tang and has become a follower of immortal Qian Deng.
So, are you interested?"
Xianxia giggled as she looked at Lu Chen, and said, "Those who do things like cultivating spiritual energy are either seniors, elders, or young and powerful geniuses in our sect. If they are fated, they will have great fortune in the future."
Lu Chen looked at her for a moment and suddenly laughed.
He nodded and said, "Yes, of course I'm interested."
"That promise." He pointed at Xianxia and nodded. "Help me with this." Xianxia nodded with a smile. Deep in the woods,
the bloody hand flitted across Atu's eyes slowly. The scarlet and terrifying color of blood was like a sharp knife, causing its pupils to contract uncontrollably. The extraordinarily beautiful girl was gently stroking the fur of Atsu's back with her delicate, snow-white left hand. Her right hand was dripping with blood, filling the air with a strong pungent smell of blood. This strange scene was concentrated on her, making her look like a holy fairy, but also like a ferocious evil spirit.
"Eat."
Her deep and melodious voice reverberated through the forest. "You have the bloodline of the heavenly wolf. You were born to be different. How can ordinary food satisfy your appetite? Only blood, blood that contains spiritual power, is what you desire the most. Come eat." She slowly put her hand to the mouth of Atsu, with a strange smile on her face. She seemed to be looking forward to it, but also sympathizing with it. Perhaps there was also a little desire.
"Come taste this blood.
As long as you have tasted it, one day, the blood in your body will awaken." Atsu's breathing slowly became louder.
Its eyes seemed to be struggling in pain.
It wanted to leave several times, but every time its eyes fell on the bloody hand again. After a while, Atsu's head slowly moved closer. It stuck out its tongue and gently licked the petite but demon-like bloody hand. The blood dispersed and melted into its mouth. The light in the woods quietly dimmed. Unknowingly, it was already dusk. Chapter 101. At dusk, when the sky was about to turn dark, the sunset glow was still hanging in the western sky, like a burning flame, radiating an unusually beautiful and brilliant afterglow. Stone Pan Valley was already a little dark, and most of the odd job disciples had already left. Lu Chen and Xianxia were still sitting on the edge of the field, looking at the deserted surroundings, but only the two of them were left. A long time had passed, and the sky was about to turn dark, but Atsu still hadn't come back. Xianxia was a little anxious, constantly looking around, and at the same time, glancing at Lu Chen from time to time. Lu Chen also frowned slightly, looking a little surprised. They waited like this for a while, watching the sky get darker and darker, and the last ray of the sun was about to disappear. The vast Stone Pan Valley was about to be shrouded in darkness. Xianxia finally couldn't help but stand up, and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, let's go find Atsu?" Lu Chen frowned. "This valley is too big, and we don't know where that stupid dog went. Plus it's dark, we can't find it." Suddenly, Xianxia's eyes lit up, and she said, "Could it be that Atsu ran back home by itself?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "It shouldn't be these days, it has been with me every day, and has never slipped away by itself."
"Oh, what should we do?"
Xianxia was anxious, and it seemed that she was really worried. Just as she was panicking, she suddenly heard Lu Chen, who was next to her, say, "Look over there." Xianxia looked in the direction that Lu Chen was pointing, and saw that on the other side of the field, on a path that had become very dark, suddenly a black shadow suddenly appeared, slowly walking out of the darkness, and then approached them. The black shadow was not tall. When it got closer, it really looked like Atu. But the strange thing was, Atu, who was usually lively and energetic, even though he was lame but still loved to run, was walking abnormally slowly at this time. Step by step, it stepped on the field embankment, and the darkness silently surged around it, as if it had become one with its black fur. Only its pair of eyes faintly glowed in the dark valley, and it seemed a little different from usual.
At Xianxia shouted with joy, and her previous worry suddenly disappeared. She walked towards the black dog with a smile, and at the same time, she opened her arms and said with a smile, "Stinky Atsu, I have been waiting for you for a long time today. Where did you go to play?" Atsu's footsteps slightly paused, and it slowly raised its head. When it saw Xian running towards it, it immediately stopped. Behind Xian, Lu Chen looked at Atsu's eyes, and then followed without saying a word. Ha! In the blink of an eye, Xian had already run to Atsu's side, squatted down, and first touched Atsu's head with her hand. Then, as usual, she touched the fur on Atsu's back with one hand, and held Atsu's head with the other, and played with it affectionately. Her white skin looked particularly beautiful and conspicuous in the night. Her slender neck and cheeks were right in front of Atsu's eyes, and from time to time, she even leaned on it, accompanied by her cheerful and crisp voice. It seemed so warm. Atsu's pair of eyes stared closely at Xian's neck, which was very close to it. Its mouth slightly opened and closed, as if it was panting. Gradually, it opened its mouth again, like a thirsty traveler seeing clear and sweet spring water in front of it. Its snow-white sharp fangs were shining at the edge of its mouth, giving off a sense of coldness. Its head faintly shrank back, and then slowly stretched forward, as if responding to Xian's joyful hug, and slowly approached the girl's white neck. Sharp fangs and blood vessels that seemed like they could be broken with a single blow were very close. Suddenly, a hand suddenly stretched out from the dark shadow, passed through Xian's shoulder, and pressed down, covering the black dog's eyes. That pair of deep and serene eyes suddenly disappeared in the darkness of the night. Atsu's body suddenly shook, and its body trembled. The hair on its neck suddenly stood up, but it instantly calmed down. Everything happened so fast that it was almost invisible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, it quieted down again, standing still in the same place, letting Lu Chen's palm cover its eyes. "You stupid dog, where did you run off to?" Lu Chen laughed and scolded Atsu. His palm was still covering Atsu's eyes, and his body was also squatting beside Atsu, looking like he was covering Atsu's head. Then he turned his head and said to Xian with a smile, "But we are finally back. It's getting late, and there will be curfew later. It seems that we won't be able to play today. Let's go back." Xian hesitated for a moment, and then said with a smile, "Okay." As she said that, she touched Atsu's soft fur again, and said with a smile, "Atsu, listen to Brother Lu, I will come to play with you tomorrow, okay? But you can't just run out and come back so late again." Atsu stood still, its eyes were still covered by Lu Chen's hand, and it remained silent. However, its mouth slightly opened and closed, and a dark light flashed past its sharp white fangs. "Don't worry, I will find a rope to tie it to a tree later, and see if it can still run away." "Ah, then don't. Atsu is so pitiful," Xian immediately protested. Lu Chen smiled and nodded and said, "Up to you, I won't tie it up if you say so." "Hey!" Xian suddenly became happy. She nodded and smiled at Lu Chen, then patted Atsu's head again, and turned to walk away. After a few steps, she suddenly seemed to think of something, and looked back. She saw that on the ridge of the field, Lu Chen was still gently pressing Atsu's eyes. A man and a dog were side by side, and their posture seemed a little strange. "Brother Lu, why do you always cover Atsu's eyes?" Xian asked loudly. "Oh, this stupid dog is not obedient. I have to teach it a lesson. I will bring it back later," Lu Chen replied with a smile. Xian replied with an "oh," turned around and continued to walk, and soon disappeared into the night. When the last remnant of the girl also disappeared, only Lu Chen and Atsu were left in the entire valley. At this time, the sky was completely dark, and darkness spread from all directions, completely swallowing their figures. In the darkness, Atsu was still standing quietly, as if it was waiting for something. After a while, it suddenly felt that its eyes were loosened, and then the palm that was covering its eyes slowly moved away. The face of the man in the darkness appeared in front of it, like a shadow in the dark night, blurry and indistinct. There was only a pair of bright but stern eyes, staring coldly into Atsu's eyes. Between heaven and earth, suddenly, there was a cold wind blowing. It was bone-chilling, as if it could freeze and solidify blood. Atsu took a step back, then slowly, gently lowered its body to the ground, like an obedient subject,
bowing its head in front of a powerful king. In its mouth, there was a low whimpering sound. Lu Chen stared at Atsu for a while, suddenly stood up, turned around, and walked away. At the same time he said lightly, "It's late, let's go back." In a secluded valley, in a simple and deserted hut, Lu Chen lit a candle. The door was closed, and the window was tightly shut, so this lonely hut seemed to be isolated from the outside world, becoming a small world. Atsu was lying at Lu Chen's feet, looking a little sleepy and tired, but it didn't fall asleep. It put its head close to Lu Chen's ankle, slightly rubbing against it. Its long black tail would shake from time to time, but it was still unusually quiet. Lu Chen sat alone in silence for a long time, frowning slightly, as if he was thinking about something. After a long time, he suddenly bent down and sat directly on the ground. At the same time, he reached out and picked up Atsu, and put it on his feet. An inexplicable aura seemed to be faintly exuding from his body. Atsu twisted its body uneasily, but after glancing at the expressionless Lu Chen, it quickly calmed down and quietly lay in his arms. Lu Chen's eyes swept over Atsu's body, staying for a long time on its eyes, then suddenly reached out and opened Atsu's mouth. Snow-white sharp fangs were exposed in front of him, mixed with a faint, almost imperceptible smell of blood. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. He loosened his fingers, then pressed his palm on the fur of Atsu's body, and slowly touched down. Under the fur, the black dog's muscles bulged a little, wrapped around its bones, giving it a strange sense of power. When his hand slid across Atsu's chest, Lu Chen suddenly stopped. Through the muscles and fur, in the chest, there was a heart beating strongly. Strong, fast, and violent, beating far better than ordinary beasts, and far better than his usual self. There was a trace of haze in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes, but there was not much change in his expression. After feeling the strange heartbeat of Atsu for a while, his palm slid down again, touching the back of Atsu's back. Suddenly, there was a little moisture in his hand. Lu Chen looked down slightly, and saw a dark shadow between Atsu's black fur. It seemed to be the remnants of blood that had flowed through, emitting a subtle smell between the dry and bloody smell. Then, not far away, there was another similar small bloodstain. Lu Chen touched it bit by bit, and pieces of remnant traces gradually appeared on Atsu's fur. Some of them were attached to the surface, and some had penetrated deep into the skin. Then, they converged together, and finally formed a shape. Lu Chen's expression turned cold for the first time, and his gaze was as cold as a knife. He looked at the thing that was formed by traces of blood on the back of the black dog in front of him. It was a handprint. A handprint formed by blood. He suddenly covered it with his palm, and then found that the handprint seemed to be only half the size of his palm, as if it was a child's palm, stained with blood, and left this bloody handprint on Atsu's body. The night was getting darker, and suddenly, a cold wind blew by, abruptly knocking open the window of the house. The cold wind rushed in, and abruptly blew out the candle flame. The whole world suddenly turned dark. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.